It started with a smell. Not strong at first, just faint and annoying. Like something singed or cooked a bit too long. At first, I thought it was coming from outside. Maybe someone smoking near the building or burning trash. It was that kind of light, smoky smell that didn't immediately make you panic, but made you wrinkle your nose and look around. I was living on the third floor of the dormitory in a student hostel on the university campus. The building was old, the kind with long, echoing hallways and doors that never closed properly unless you gave them a push. The heaters rattled at night, and the pipes clicked in the walls. You learn to ignore the sounds pretty fast. The smell first came during midterms week. I remember because I was pulling late nights, trying to cram for a pathology exam. I'd sit by my window, sipping instant coffee and flipping through notes, and sometime after midnight, that burning smell would start to creep in through the air vent above my desk. Not strong, not thick, just there, subtle. I assumed it was probably someone microwaving something weird or burning toast. It happened again the next night, and the night after that, I started noticing a pattern. The smell always came after midnight, usually closer to 1 in the morning. It never got strong enough to fill the room, but it was always enough to make me get up, check my little electric kettle, make sure nothing in my room was on fire. Then I'd stand near the window for a few minutes, wondering if it was coming from outside or from the hallway. But there was something that began to bother me more than the smell itself. The fire alarm never went off. This building had a wired-in fire alarm system, with those rectangular red boxes on every floor. There were speakers built into the walls. We had fire drills once every semester. Loud, screaming drills. You couldn't miss them even if you tried. The entire floor had to evacuate whenever one went off. But with this smell, this clear, smoky, burnt smell, there was nothing. Not even a chirp from the system. I thought maybe I was imagining things. Or being paranoid. I've been under a lot of pressure with exams and late-night study. Maybe I was just overthinking it. Still, I mentioned it to a couple of guys on my floor in passing. They shrugged it off. One of them said he smelled something too, but didn't think much of it. Probably someone's making something weird again. He mumbled and went back to scrolling his phone. But something kept gnawing at me. By the third week, it had become routine. I'd be sitting in my chair, half asleep with textbooks spread around me, and right on time, around 1 a.m., the smell would slip in again. It was like a warning, a whisper in the air that something wasn't right. One night, I opened my door and stepped into the hallway, just to be sure. The hallway smelled clean, or at least neutral. There is a usual scent of old carpet and cleaning solution, but no smoke. I walked quietly down the corridor, barefoot, not wanting to wake anyone. Still nothing. I even crouched near the vent along the baseboard. Nothing. I went back to my room, closed the door, and the smell was there again, waiting. After a few more nights, I started experimenting. I taped a napkin loosely over the vent, just to see if the smell was really coming from there. That night, the napkin smelled faintly of smoke. Not with smoke, not cigarette smoke. It was sharper, drier, like overheated plastic or something cooked dry. Definitely not just someone's food. That's when I got serious. The next morning, I skipped my usual coffee and went straight to the dormitory's main floor. I walked around the building, checking where the air vents lined up. I wasn't a plumber or an HVAC expert, but I figured if the smell came through my vent, maybe it was linked to something below me. The building had 4 floors, and I was on the 3rd. I tried to trace the shaft downward. That's when I realized the smell might be coming from the laundry room. Our laundry room was in the basement, down a narrow, tiled hallway behind the main staircase. It had a card-operated system, 3 washers and 3 dryers. The walls were yellow from age, and the floor was always slightly damp from spilled detergent or wet socks someone dropped. I never liked being down there alone, especially at night. It was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Even footsteps didn't echo properly. I pushed the door open. It smelled strongly of detergent and warm fabric. I sniffed the air carefully. Nothing obviously wrong. I opened one of the dryers and leaned in. It was warm, not hot, but the metal smelled burnt. Not recently burnt, but like something had overheated often and left a smell behind. That sort of baked in heat. I started inspecting the dryers more closely. I looked around the edges, behind them, under the lint filters. That's when I noticed something odd. small, brownish scorch marks on the wall behind one of the units. Like steam or heat had darkened the paint. No smoke, no flames, but it didn't look right. Still, no alarm, no blinking light, nothing. I stared up at the fire detector in the ceiling. It was there, just like every other room. A standard white disc with tiny holes and a test button. But the tiny green light that usually blinked wasn't blinking. I pulled a chair from the corner, climbed up carefully, and looked closer. There was a small piece of black electrical tape covering the vent holes of the alarm. I felt a jolt of disbelief. It was such a lazy, obvious thing, not even well hidden. Just a small strip of tape covering the intake vents of the smoke detector. Enough to prevent it from detecting smoke or steam. Someone had done this on purpose. I climbed down slowly and stood in the middle of the room, heart beating a little faster. This wasn't just a case of old wiring or a broken alarm. Someone had intentionally disabled the fire detection system in the laundry room, and no one had noticed. I left the basement quickly, pretending like I hadn't seen anything. My thoughts were running too fast. Back in my room, I sat down and tried to make sense of it. Why would someone cover the fire detector? Then I remembered there had been a bunch of false alarms earlier in the semester. At least 2 or 3 in the middle of the night. Each time, the whole building had to evacuate. People complained. I remembered seeing signs posted around then, saying avoid overloading dryers and clean lint traps regularly. Maybe the laundry room detector had been tripped too many times by steam or heat, and someone decided to silence it. A student maybe, or even someone on staff. But that didn't make it safe. That smell I'd been noticing every night, it was real. And if the dryers were overheating and the one thing that could warn us was disabled, then it was only a matter of time before something serious happened. That night, I stayed up again. Around 1 in the morning, the smell returned, just like before, dry and burnt and artificial. I walked around my room, checking the walls and vents again, and the same faint smell came from the metal grate above the desk. That confirmed it for me. The smell was traveling from the basement through the air ducts, spreading upwards. My room must have been on the same vertical shaft that passed by the laundry room. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept imagining a fire starting silently in the basement, creeping up the vents, black smoke rising while we all slept. No warning, no alarm. Just heat and smoke and silence. The next day, I went to the housing office. I didn't know who would take me seriously, so asked for a maintenance form and filled out a request to check the fire alarm in the basement laundry room. I described the smell, the hidden scorch marks, and the cover detector. I expected it to disappear into some folder. But 3 days later, I saw a man in a blue uniform carrying a stepladder down to the basement. I followed him at a distance and watched from the hallway. He peeled the tape off the alarm, tested it, and wrote something on a clipboard. Later that evening, a notice was taped to the main bulletin board. Due to recent safety concerns, the basement laundry room fire alarm has been reactivated. Please refrain from tampering with detection systems. Overloading dryers can be a fire hazard. Report all issues to housing maintenance. It didn't seem like much, just a plain notice. No names, no blum, but the smell stopped. That night, and every night after, I waited at my desk for the familiar burnt smell to return. But it didn't. The air stayed clean. I still kept an eye on the vent for a few more nights, just to be sure. Eventually, I went back to studying normally. No one ever asked me about the report. I didn't mention it again. I don't even know if the other students noticed or cared. But I thought about how close it might have been. Those dryers running late at night, overloaded with clothes, the heat building up without anyone checking. And the one thing that was supposed to warn us quietly silenced with a piece of tape. It didn't feel like a horror story. It wasn't dramatic or loud, but it was real. Real enough to almost turn deadly without a single spark. Sometimes, danger doesn't come in the form of monsters or masked figures. Sometimes it's a forgotten machine in the corner of a basement, slowly overheating while everyone sleeps. And sometimes, the only thing that keeps something awful from happening is someone noticing a smell that doesn't belong. I had just finished my second year of college when we were all told that due to a sudden reshuffling of rooms, everyone had to vacate their current hostel accommodations and move to new ones. Apparently, there was some ongoing maintenance on plumbing lines in the older wing. and our hostel management was using this chance to reorganize room allocations. Most of us didn't think much of it. It wasn't the first time our hostel administration had made last-minute decisions, and we had grown used to it. We were given new room numbers through an email. Mine was now room 209 in Block B. The hostel had several blocks, and I had stayed in Block A previously, so Block B was unfamiliar to me. The moving process was messy. I packed my belongings in cardboard boxes I had saved from old deliveries and dragged them with me across the courtyard. It was hot, and I was sweating by the time I reached my new block. Room 209 was on the second floor, right at the end of the corridor. I liked that it was slightly isolated. Fewer people walked by, which meant more quiet. The room was slightly smaller than my previous one, but had better lighting. The walls had fewer cracks, and the bed was sturdier. I dropped my boxes, unlocked the room using the code I was given, 4317, and went in. The room smelled a bit like paint, and there was still some plastic wrapping on the corners of the mattress. Maybe someone had done a half-hearted renovation here recently. I spent the evening unpacking, folding clothes, and placing books on the shelf. There wasn't much to do. I didn't have many things anyway. That night, I locked the door and slept well. There were distant noises from people still shifting rooms, dragging furniture, and occasionally dropping things. But nothing strange. The next morning, I woke up and noticed my deodorant was missing. I usually kept on my study table near my toothbrush and toothpaste, but it was gone. I looked inside the drawer, under the bed, and even inside my backpack, but it wasn't there. I figured I'd left it inside, one of the unopened boxes, and didn't think much of it. I left for class and came back around 6 p.m. When I entered the room and dropped my bag on the chair, I noticed something else. My phone charger, which I always left plugged into the socket near the bed, was unplugged and placed neatly on the table. I was sure I'd left it in the socket that morning because my phone had been charging while I was brushing my teeth. I didn't touch it before leaving. I thought maybe I was just being absent-minded. The last few days have been chaotic with the exams just ending and the room shift happening so suddenly. I tried to dismiss it, but when I opened my wardrobe, I found that my towel, which I always hung on the inner hook, was on the bed, slightly damp. That made no sense. I hadn't used the towel since the morning, and I had definitely placed it back inside. That night, I felt uneasy. I sat on my bed and stared around the room. Everything looked normal, but something in my stomach felt tight. I walked over to the door and checked the lock twice. I punched in the code from outside, waited for the green light, and went in again. The code worked fine. The next morning, I woke up to find the chair had been moved. Normally, I kept it tucked in under the table, but now it was slightly pushed back at an angle like someone had been sitting there. I stared at it for a long time. When I opened my mini fridge, I found a small Tupperware box inside that I didn't recognize. It had 2 boiled eggs and a slice of bread. I hadn't packed anything like that. I even checked if maybe I had brought it from my old room and forgotten about it, but I never used Tupperware. My food always came in takeaway boxes from the mess downstairs or tinfoil. I started feeling like I was losing it. I checked the lock system again. The keypad outside the door was digital. You punched in the 4-digit code and the green light flashed. If the code was wrong, it flashed red. I checked the code on my email again, 4317. That's what I had been using, and it worked every time. I decided to skip class that day and stay inside. I thought maybe someone was messing with me. Maybe someone got the wrong room or was playing some kind of prank. I spent the day inside, reading, writing, and watching the door. Nothing happened, but the next morning, I woke up to find someone had left a half-used pen on my notebook. A black gel pen. I didn't own any gel pens. I only used blue ballpoints. I checked my drawers again, searched the pockets of all my jeans and bags. Nothing. I started keeping a log of everything that seemed off. Day 1, deodorant missing. Day 2, charger unplugged, damn towel moved. Day 3, food box and fridge, chair moved. Day 4, unknown pen. Then something changed. One evening when I returned from class, I punched in my code and the keypad flashed red. I tried again, 4317. Still red. I stood there, confused, and tried a third time. Green light. Door unlocked. I entered cautiously. Everything looked the same, but something smelled different. Slightly fruity, like shampoo. A kind of fragrance I had never used. I walked over to the bathroom and found hair strands in the sink. Long ones. Definitely not mine. My hair was short and black. These were brown and longer. I turned and stared at the room. My bed looked slept in, but I hadn't been home since morning. I began to feel sick. I took out my phone and checked the email again. Same code, same room number. That night, I took a black marker and drew a tiny dot behind the curtain near the window, almost invisible. Just a way to check if anything had changed when I wasn't around. Next morning, I woke up and found the curtain slightly open. The mark was gone. Someone had wiped or cleaned it. I hadn't told anyone about it. I hadn't even written it down in my log. At that point, I couldn't sleep properly. I would wake up multiple times at night and just stare at the door listening. One night, around 3 a.m., I thought I heard the lock beep, the kind of sound it makes when someone punches in the code. I held my breath. The door didn't open, but I was sure I heard something from outside. The next day, I went to the warden's office. The receptionist wasn't there, so I walked past the counter and found the logbook left open. There were lists of students and room allocations printed and stapled to a file. I looked for my name and found it under room 209. But just below my name, I saw another student's name also listed for room 209. Same room number, different student ID, different course. I wrote down the other student's name and ID in my notebook and left. I didn't know who the other person was, but the idea that two people had been assigned the same room shook me. Maybe they had been entering the room when I was gone. Maybe we both had the same key code and didn't know someone else was using it too. I couldn't find the other student immediately, so I stayed in my room and waited. That night, I pretended to leave. I packed my bag loudly, walked down the corridor, then silently came back and hid behind the staircase landing that overlooked my door. It was around 9:40 p.m. when I saw someone walk up. He walked casually, holding a plastic bag, maybe food. He looked around, then stood at the door and typed in the code. The green light blinked and he walked in. My room. I waited a few minutes and walked up, slowly and quietly. I pressed my ear to the door. I heard movement inside. Something shifting, maybe the chair. I knocked. The movement stopped. Then I heard hurried footsteps and the door opened slightly. A boy stood there, probably a year or two older than me. He looked at me with a mixture of confusion and panic. We both stood there in silence for a few seconds, just staring at each other. I didn't say anything. He didn't either. He stepped back and let me walk in. My bed had been unmade. His food was on the table. He looked around like he didn't know what to say. He reached into his bag and took out his phone, showing me the hostel allocation email. It said room 209, code 4317, same as mine. We just stood there. It was clear that it wasn't either of our faults. The system had assigned both of us the same room, and since neither of us had been there at the same time initially, we hadn't noticed. Slowly, we had both started using the room without knowing someone else was also using it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. I packed a few of my things and left the room to sleep in a friend's room for the night. The next day, I went back to the warden's office and demanded they fix it. I showed both our names on the printed sheet. They apologized and said it was a clerical error during the system update. They reassigned me to room 213 for doors down and gave me a new key code. The other guy had been reassigned too. Looking back, all the strange events made sense. The missing items, the moved objects, the unfamiliar smells and objects. We had both been entering the same room at different times, assuming it was only ours. Our routines overlapped enough to make the confusion last for days. There were no ghosts, no mysteries, just two students unknowingly sharing a room because someone typed in the same key code for both of us. Everything had a normal explanation, but even so, it shook me. The idea that someone had been walking into my room without my knowledge, while I had been doing the same, was enough to leave me paranoid for weeks. From then on, I always double-checked my room assignments. I also started keeping a lock on my bag, even when inside the room. Nothing happened again after the change, but for a while, I found myself waking up at night and looking at the door, half expecting it to open. It never did again, but that experience taught me how thin the line is between safe. I checked into the hostel on a rainy Monday evening. The city was new to me, loud in all the wrong ways and quiet in the ones that mattered. The streets were full of sharp smells, wet dust, fuel and fried snacks from vendors crouched under plastic sheets. I had just arrived for a semester-long study exchange and didn't know a single person in the city. My course wouldn't start for another week, so I had time to settle in. The hostel was cheap, central, and filled with students who mostly kept to themselves. The room they gave me was on the third floor, tucked between the stairwell and the fire exit. It had plain white walls, a single window facing an alley, and 2 beds, one of which was empty. A wooden desk with deep scratches, a metal chair that creaked when I sat on it, and a ceiling fan that never spun straight. Everything about the room screamed temporary. It didn't matter. I wasn't here to enjoy myself. I just needed a place to sleep and store my books. The first few days went fine. I unpacked, did some reading, went out to explore the campus. I took long walks just to know the roads. At night, I tried to sleep early. The hostel wasn't noisy, except for the occasional thud of feet on the stairs or a door slamming somewhere down the corridor. But the nights in that room began to change after the 3rd day. It started small. Around 1:15 a.m., the lights would flicker once or twice and go out. Not the whole hostel, just my room. The fan would stop. My laptop would click as it shut down. At first, I thought it was a power-saving setup, maybe something the hostel had done to control electricity use. But when I stepped into the hallway, the light outside was still on. The bathroom across the hall had power too. Only my room was affected. The first time it happened, the power came back in about 4 minutes. I sat on my bed, phone flashlight on, waiting. When the ceiling light blinked back to life, I let it go. Probably a minor fault. But then it happened again, and again. Same time. Always between 1:10 and 1:25 in the morning, and only for a few minutes. After the 5th night, I went downstairs during the day and asked the receptionist. He just nodded vaguely and told me maybe a fuse was loose and someone would check it. Nothing came of it. I didn't push. I didn't want to be that guy, the newcomer complaining about power issues while everyone else managed just fine. But it started getting to me. Every night, I would look at the clock as it crept closer to 1 a.m. I couldn't sleep properly. I'd lie in bed, waiting for the lights to go. Some nights they didn't. Most nights they did. Always for a few minutes. Never more than 10. It sounds stupid when I write it now. A few minutes of darkness in the middle of the night shouldn't have affected me. But there's something about sudden, unexplained blackouts that makes the walls feel closer. The air in the room would shift. I could hear everything. The creak of the bed frame when I shifted, the ticking of my wristwatch, the rustle of leaves from the alley outside, the faint buzz of some faraway street lamp. And I always imagined something else, something I couldn't name. My mind began to fill the silence with things I couldn't prove, like the sense that I wasn't alone in the room during those few minutes. I knew it wasn't true. I would check the door twice before sleeping. But lying there in the dark with no fan, no light, no hum the laptop, every sound felt amplified. Every shadow in my memory felt heavier. By the 2nd week, I started leaving a small battery-powered light on my desk, just in case. I stopped using my laptop past midnight, worried it would get damaged if the power cut mid-use. I even started showering early because I didn't want to be caught halfway through if the lights went. I started building my evenings around those few minutes of darkness, like an invisible curfew. Then the dream started. Always the same feeling. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, convinced that someone had been standing over my bed. But there was no one there. The door would still be locked. My phone would still be on the desk. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One night, I stayed up late reading on my phone, sitting with my back against the wall. I didn't want to lie down. The power cut hit right on schedule, and I sat there, phone light off, trying to listen. That's when I heard a noise. A dull, low humming sound. It didn't come from my room. It came from below, from the floor beneath mine. It only lasted a minute, maybe less. Then it stopped. The lights came back. I tried to ignore it, but now the blackouts had a companion. That strange humming. It didn't happen every night, but when it did, it always came during the blackout. A deep mechanical sound, like a motor starting up. I started counting the seconds between the lights going out and the hum beginning. They usually matched. Lights out. 5 seconds. Hum. 10 seconds. Silence. Lights back. I knew I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't happening. So one morning, I went downstairs to the mess area. It was in the basement, a large space with a tiled floor, a few tables, some vending machines, and a kitchen that always smelled like burnt toast and boiled cabbage. I noticed a metal door behind the food counter. It had a no entry sign on it and a small keypad. Definitely staff only. I hung around for a while, watched the staff come and go. I saw one guy, tall, thin, wearing a white kitchen coat, go through that door with a key card. When it opened, I heard a short burst of that same humming sound. The same one from my blackout nights. Then the door closed. That evening, I searched online about power faults. I learned more about circuits and electrical loads than I thought I ever would. Apparently, if someone ran a heavy appliance, something like an industrial fridge or a large machine, on a shared power line, it could trip other parts of the circuit, especially if the line wasn't designed for it. It didn't explain why only my room was affected, but it gave me a place to start. I spoke to an electrician I found online and asked a few hypothetical questions. He said if a heavy appliance was drawing power suddenly at night, and the wiring was old or shared in a weird way, it could trigger a localized power drop in specific rooms, especially if there was a faulty relay or breaker involved. That was it. That was my answer. I went back to the hostel and asked for a room change. They said they were full. I asked if they could at least get someone to check the wiring. They said they would. They didn't. So I decided to check for myself. That night, I stayed up again. This time, I kept my phone recording. I noted the time when the blackout hit, 1:14 a.m. The hum followed 6 seconds later. I stayed still, counting my breaths. After 10 minutes, the power came back. The next day, I downloaded the recording to my laptop and amplified the sound. The hum was there, loud and clear. I played it again and again. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I snuck into the mess hall during lunch while the staff were busy. I walked to the back, waited until no one was watching, and pushed the metal door open just enough to peek inside. There was a room filled with old kitchen equipment, some of it humming softly. And in the corner, huge, rusted, and very much alive, was an industrial-grade refrigeration unit, the kind used in large commercial kitchens. It looked patched together, with wires running along the floor. Someone had clearly added it without proper installation. I didn't go in. I just closed the door and walked away. That night, I waited again. Same blackout, same hum, and I knew what it was now. That fridge, or whatever else they had plugged in down there, was drawing too much power when kicked on. My room, for some reason, shared a direct line with it. And the moment the fridge started, the power dipped, tripped something, and killed my electricity. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was just bad wiring and negligence. Still, the knowledge didn't make it easier to live with. I felt angrier now. I knew the problem, and no one would fix it. My sleep kept getting worse. I kept imagining the relay failing completely. A spark, a fire. I started unplugging everything before sleeping. I even packed a go bag and kept it by the door. I lasted 3 more nights. On the 4th, I booked a room in a student guest house across town. It cost more, but it was clean, quiet, and didn't have faulty wiring. I moved out the next morning. I didn't make a scene. I didn't tell anyone about the fridge or the power faults. I left a short review online mentioning intermittent power issues in room 309. That was it. A week later, someone messaged me on the student forum. A new exchange student had moved into room 309. He asked if I'd ever experienced weird blackouts around 1 a.m. I told him yes, and I gave him the same advice I wish someone had given me. Don't wait for it to fix itself. Get out early, before it starts getting into your head, because it will. I moved into the 6th floor of our university's West Hostel block at the end of August. The building was old, built in the 80s, with wide cement staircases, flickering corridor lights, and stained carpets. The kind of place you learn to ignore the flaws of because rent's cheap and no one really complains. Most of the rooms were double occupancy, and I share mine with a guy named Sunil. He was quiet, mostly kept to himself, which suited me fine. We weren't friends exactly, but we coexisted without any friction. The 6th floor had its own rhythm. You notice the same patterns every week. People doing laundry on Sunday evenings, the clatter of someone cooking Maggie at midnight in the pantry, the early risers jogging down the hallway in their shoes. Nothing stood out in particular for the first few weeks. But by mid-September, I started noticing something odd about the cleaning staff. It was small at first. A bucket left behind. A broom leaned awkwardly in the hallway. A pair of worn-out slippers near the washroom door one day, and completely different footwear the next. I didn't think much of it. But over time, I realized the cleaners on our floor kept changing. Every single day, there was a new face. Sometimes a tall man, sometimes a short woman, sometimes someone who looked like they hadn't eaten in days. Some were elderly, some looked like teenagers. They never said anything. They barely even looked up. They moved quickly, quietly, wiping the floors and scrubbing toilets and disappearing before lunch. I never saw them talking to anyone. They didn't hang around in the staff room on the ground floor, which I'd seen the regular older janitors use in other blocks. They never even knocked. If the door was open, they cleaned inside. If not, they skipped it. I tried to pay more attention and noticed that no one seemed to know who was cleaning on any given day. When I asked a few guys in the common room, they just shrugged. Some said maybe the usual staff was on leave. One thought the cleaners were being rotated across buildings. No one really cared, but it kept bothering me. Something about how quiet they were, how quickly they worked, how different they looked from one day to the next. I started writing it down, just small notes. Tuesday, young boy, maybe 16, thin, short sleeves, didn't mop under the beds. Wednesday, old man, hunched back, moved slowly, smelled of kerosene. Thursday, girl with hair tied tight, didn't speak, finished floor in 10 minutes. I kept a notebook under my bed and wrote in it after lunch or before sleeping. After about 2 weeks, I had about 11 different people noted. No repeats. That struck me as strange. Surely the cleaning company wouldn't have that many workers for one floor. And why only our floor? When I asked Raj from the 5th floor about his cleaners, he said the same woman came every morning at 9. Her name was Rekha. She even chatted with the students while sweeping. That pushed me deeper. I started watching the corridor after breakfast. The cleaning people usually came between 10 and 11. I pretend to be doing something in the hallway, checking my phone, cleaning my shoes, looking for something in my bag, just to observe them. Sometimes they carried plastic buckets with government property stenciled on the side. Other times, just old metal cans. None of them had uniforms or ID badges. Some wore torn slippers. One didn't have shoes at all. They avoided eye contact like it was dangerous. If you looked at them too long, they would turn away. I tested it a few times, stood near the common bathroom door and stared. They'd pause, wait, then turn their back or walk into a different section of the hall. One day, I followed a girl who had come in carrying a tiny bottle of Harpic. She took a shortcut through the back stairwell and vanished before I could get to the landing. Things started feeling heavier after that. Not exactly frightening, but tense. There was a sense that something wasn't right. A few guys complained about missing things: soap bars, toothbrushes, a towel. No one pointed fingers. People assumed maybe other students had taken them. But I remembered seeing one of the younger cleaners with a bundle under his shirt walking down the fire stairs. One night in early October, I stayed up late writing an assignment and went to fill water from the cooler around 2 a.m. As I walked past the bathroom, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but there was no one. The hallway was empty. Then I saw a bucket near the door, filled with dirty water, a rag floating on top. That made no sense. Cleaning didn't happen at night. I checked the cooler quickly and went back inside, locking the door. I didn't sleep much that night. I decided I needed to understand what was going on. I started going to the admin building after classes. It took me a few visits to find someone who knew about facility management. One staff officer said cleaning was outsourced to a third-party vendor after the university cut internal staff to save money. The company hired workers on short-term contracts, and they rotated them across buildings. That explains some of it, but not everything. I kept digging. The security guard near the west block recognized me and asked what I was always looking for. I told him I'd been seeing different cleaning people every day. He sighed and said the company wasn't paying some of the workers on time. There had been a protest a few months ago. A bunch of regular workers had walked off the job. Since then, the vendor was using whatever help they could find. That night, I skipped dinner and walked around the back of the building where deliveries and workers came in. There was a small storage shed near the garbage dump. I saw two boys sitting inside on a broken mattress, eating from a steel plate. One of them was the kid I'd seen on our floor a few days ago. He couldn't be more than 15. He looked up and quickly turned away when he saw me. I didn't go closer. I just stood and watched for a while. Another worker, a man this time, came out of the shed and lit a beady. He leaned against the wall and rubbed his neck like it hurt. His clothes were damp and he had bandages on his fingers. I stayed hidden behind a bush and didn't move until they went back inside. The next morning, a notice appeared on our floor's bulletin board. Due to ongoing contractual adjustments, cleaning schedules may vary. Kindly cooperate. That was it. No explanation, no apology, just a vague sentence. I asked the warden about it, and he brushed it off. So there was no issue. When I mentioned the underage workers, he warned me not to make false claims. I doubled down. I went online, searched for the name of the cleaning company. Their website was barely working. No names, no contact details. I posted anonymously on a student forum about what I'd seen. Some responses agreed. One guy from the 7th floor said he'd seen a cleaner hiding behind a water tank during the day. Another girl from the 3rd floor said her wallet went missing after she left her door open while showering. Then my notebook disappeared. I'd hidden it under my mattress, like always. One afternoon, I came back from class and found the mattress shifted slightly. The notebook was gone. I didn't tell anyone. I started keeping new notes in a locked drawer. I changed my schedule to stay awake longer. Sometimes I sat near the hallway with my laptop, pretending to study, while secretly watching who came and went. One night, I saw a group of 4 workers exit from the fire door at 4 a.m. They carried bags and walked barefoot. One looked injured. He was limping badly. They disappeared into the trees behind the water tank. By mid-October, things got worse. Bathrooms weren't cleaned properly anymore. Trash bins were overflowing. Some toilets were locked completely. We found dirty water flooding the corridor one morning. People started noticing the inconsistency. The cleaner that came Tuesday morning didn't return Wednesday. No one did. When someone from our floor complained, a temporary team came in the evening and rushed through the whole place in 20 minutes. That same day, I saw a girl, maybe 13 years old, scrubbing the toilet floor near room 608. She flinched when I walked past. Her hands were red and cracked. I kept walking, but it made me sick. That night, I left my phone recording in the hallway outside of it, just to see. In the morning, I played back the footage. At 3:17 a.m., 2 figures came into view. One looked like a boy. The other was shorter, thinner, could have been a girl. They moved quickly, mopped near the pantry, then dragged a garbage bag down the hall. No talking, no shoes, just silent movements in the dark. I downloaded the footage, clipped it, and sent it to a local news blog anonymously. I used a new email ID, no name. I explained what was going on, how underpaid, undocumented workers, some possibly minors, were being used in dangerous conditions at night, with no supervision or safety. A week later, someone from the newspaper came to campus. They didn't ask for names, just showed up at the hostel gate and tried to interview a few students. The warden blocked them. Security escorted them out. But something had changed. The very next day, our entire floor was cleaned thoroughly by a team in proper uniforms. The workers had name tags and gloves. One even smiled at me. I didn't smile back. I didn't trust it. Over the next week, I saw fewer strange faces. The rotation stopped. The cleaning happened during daytime hours. Trash bins were emptied regularly. No more barefoot kids, no more people hiding behind doors. It was like the system corrected itself overnight. I never got my notebook back, but I kept the video footage and the screenshots. The news blog published a small article about anonymous I moved into my new hostel room in early August, just before the semester started. The room was small, but decent enough. The bed creaked a bit, and the walls were thin, but I didn't care much. It was better than the place I stayed the previous year. The cupboard was large, built into the wall, made of thick old wood, probably left untouched for decades. It smelled a little damp when I first opened it, but I assumed that was normal in an old building like ours. The entire hostel had this old concrete feel, and there was always a musty odor in the air, like wet clothes that had never dried fully. The first few days were uneventful. I unpacked my things, met my neighbors, and started going to classes. Nothing stood out except for the odd thumping sound I heard at night. It wasn't too loud, and I figured it must be someone moving furniture or maybe someone upstairs jumping around. Hostels are full of noises, especially when students stay up late or forget how thin the walls are. I didn't think much of it. Sometimes I even laughed to myself, imagining someone dancing at midnight. But after the first week, things got strange. I started noticing the noise more clearly. It wasn't coming from above or from a hall. It was coming from my cupboard. The first time I really paid attention to it, I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, and I heard a slow creak from behind the cupboard door. I sat up, turned off the fan to make the room quieter, and listened. Nothing. I got up, opened the cupboard, and looked inside. Just clothes, books, and a few snacks. The smell of damp wood was still there, stronger when the doors opened, but nothing else seemed unusual. I thought maybe it was a rat or some small animal. The building was old. Rats were not surprising. I bought a rat trap and placed it inside, along with some peanut butter. Nothing happened the next day, or the next, but the noises continued. Sometimes a soft thud, like someone knocking from the inside. Other times a shuffling, slow, and deliberate, like feet dragging across wood. It would happen randomly, late at night, early in the morning, or even the middle of the day when I came back from class. Then things started going missing. Not big things, but little things. A packet of biscuits, a pen, my half-eaten bar of chocolate. Once, a pair of socks disappeared. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I misplaced them. Maybe I was just tired. But it kept happening. I even began doubting my memory, which scared me more than the noises. I wasn't sleeping well. I kept thinking I was being careless. One evening I came back from class and found my cupboard slightly open. I was sure I'd closed it in the morning. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the door. The crack was small, just enough to see the darkness inside, but it was open. I walked over slowly and opened it fully. Everything seemed fine. No mess, no rats, nothing moved. I checked the trap. Still there, untouched, but something felt wrong. The air inside was heavier, warmer, like someone had been breathing in there. That night, I pushed a chair against the cupboard doors before going to bed. I want to make sure it stayed shut. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly. It was one of those moments where you don't know why you're awake, but your body just jolts you up. I listened in the dark. The fan was humming. My phone buzzed with a notification. Then I heard it, a soft creaking, slow and steady. The cupboard. The chair hadn't moved, but the creaking was real. I held my breath. The sound continued for a few seconds, then stopped. I turned the lights on, walked over, and opened the doors again. Same smell, same arrangement. Nothing out of place. I couldn't take it anymore. The next morning, I told the warden. He looked bored. Probably thought I was being paranoid or pulling some prank. He said I could file a complaint and maybe change rooms in a few weeks if it kept bothering me. A few weeks. I didn't think I could last that long, so I started looking more carefully. I began inspecting the cupboard inch by inch. I pulled out everything, looked under the bottom shelf, tapped on the back panels. That's when I heard it. A hollow sound, not the solid thud of thick wood, but something lighter. I pushed against the back of the cupboard with both hands. One of the panels gave way slightly. Just a small shift, but enough to make my stomach drop. I didn't try to open it further right away. Instead, I waited till the next day when I had more time. I skipped one of my evening lectures, came back with a flashlight, and emptied the cupboard completely. Then I pushed hard on the back panel again. This time it moved more. I pried my fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel came loose with a dry crack. Behind it was darkness, and the smell hit me like a wall, sweat, damp clothes, and something sour like spoiled food. I shined my flashlight in. It wasn't just a wall. It was a small crawl space, narrow and tight, but it extended backward. I climbed in, heart pounding, and followed the space. It led to an old janitor closet behind the wall. The closet was dusty, filled with broken brooms, paint cans, and rotting shelves. But what caught my attention was the mattress on the floor, rolled up clothes, empty biscuit packets, and a flashlight. Someone had been living there. I stumbled back, crawled out fast, and slammed the cupboard shut. I locked my room and sat on the bed for a long time. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't even angry. I was scared, not just because someone had been hiding there, but because he could still be around. I hadn't seen him. I hadn't heard him, but someone had to be coming in and out. I went to the warden again, this time more firm. I didn't tell him everything, just that I suspected someone was squatting in a hidden space. He still looked skeptical, but he agreed to check. When we opened the panel together, everything was gone. Mattress, packets, flashlight, vanished. The place looked untouched, like no one had ever been there. The warden gave me a weird look, like I was making it all up. I felt like I was losing my mind. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept the lights on, the cupboard empty, the chair pressed against the doors. Around 3 a.m., I heard the creaking again, then a soft scrape, like fingernails brushing wood. I didn't move. I just listened. After a few minutes, silence. In the morning, I opened the cupboard again. There was a fresh packet of biscuits inside, the same brand that had gone missing earlier. I hadn't bought it. That's when I realized the person wasn't just hiding. He was still using the space, coming and going without being seen, probably waiting for me to leave during the day. Maybe he had other entrances. Maybe he knew the hostel better than anyone else. I kept thinking about how he had cleared the space before the warden arrived. He must have heard me talking to him, known to clean up, and maybe even waited inside the walls while we checked. I started digging into old hostel records, asking some of the older students discreetly if they remembered anyone being suspended or expelled recently. That's when I heard about him, a guy who used to stay in the hostel last year. He got into trouble with the management. Something about cheating, fights, stealing. They suspended him mid-semester, but no one knew where he went after that. Some said he dropped out. Others said he moved to another hostel, but no one saw him again. It made sense. He must have stayed behind, squatting in empty rooms, using hidden spaces to avoid detection. My cupboard backed into the janitor closet, and that closet wasn't used anymore. The locks were broken, and no one ever went there. Perfect for someone to slip in and out. I finally caught him 2 weeks later. I pretended to leave for class, but stayed nearby. I waited quietly near the stairwell, watching my door from the corner. After about 30 minutes, I saw him. He opened the cupboard door from the inside, stepped out quietly, and walked toward the bathroom. He was thin, worn out, wearing old clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. I didn't move. I waited until he went back into the room, then ran to the warden's office. This time, the staff came with me. We waited outside the door, then burst in. He was inside, trying to crawl back into the cupboard. They caught him. He didn't fight, just froze. He looked tired more than anything. They dragged him out, and he kept his head down the whole time. They found more stuff hidden inside the janitor closet, blankets, food wrappers, even a small burner he used to cook. He'd been living there for months, maybe longer. After they removed him, the hostel board sealed the closet permanently. They changed the room locks, warned us to report anything strange immediately, and assigned guards to patrol the halls more often. I moved to another room. It was smaller and farther from class, but I didn't care. I just wanted peace. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and think I hear something creak. I lie there listening, heart racing, but then it's just silence. I don't open the cupboard anymore without checking it carefully first. I keep a chair against it. It's probably just habit now, but that experience stayed with me. It wasn't the noises or the missing food that scare me the most. It was the idea that someone was living so close to me, watching me, knowing my schedule, and slipping in and out without me ever seeing him. He knew every part of the hostel. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a monster. He was just a student who fell through the cracks and found a way to survive. And that made it worse, because it could happen again. Anywhere. To anyone. I just come back from class that evening. My phone buzzed with a notification from my network provider. I almost swiped away without thinking, but the words 90% data used caught my eye. That didn't make sense. I was on a college hostel Wi-Fi almost all day. I barely used mobile data unless I stepped out, and I hadn't gone anywhere that week except to lectures. I opened the notification. It showed a breakdown. Most of the data usage had occurred at night, long after I'd gone to bed. I brushed it off. Maybe it was some app updating itself. Maybe a background sync. I toggled off mobile data, made a mental note to check my settings, and connected to the hostel Wi-Fi. As usual, it took longer than it should have. The signal flickered once or twice before finally settling into a weak but usable connection. Our hostel Wi-Fi had never been reliable, but recently it had gone from bad to worse. Speeds were crawling, even late at night, when everyone was supposed to be asleep. Over the next few days, I began to notice more oddities. My laptop would disconnect and reconnect repeatedly. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find my browser open, as if someone had used it overnight. At first, I thought it might be updates running in the background or some script I'd left on. But the logs told a different story. My browser history showed websites I hadn't visited. Tech forums, torrent trackers, Reddit threads I had no memory of opening. That was when I started getting uneasy. I wasn't the paranoid type, but I like to be in control of my devices. I dug into the usage stats on my router app. That was when I remembered we weren't allowed to use personal routers in the hostel. But last year, after weeks of begging, I convinced the warden to let me keep a small repeater in my room. I had explained that my room, located on the far wing of the third floor, barely got a usable signal. He'd eventually agreed, after I promised not to misuse it. It wasn't really a full router, more like a signal booster, but it had some admin features built in. I logged into it and went through the logs. The MAC addresses didn't match just my devices. There were others. A tablet, an old Samsung phone, a laptop that wasn't mine. I stared at them for a long minute, tried to recall if I had ever owned or borrowed such devices. I hadn't. Someone else had been using my network. But that didn't make sense either. The hostel Wi-Fi required individual logins. Each student got a unique username and password that was tied to their student ID. You couldn't just share it. Not easily, anyway. The passwords were supposed to be randomly generated and changed every semester. I remembered what had happened last month. Our floor had a Wi-Fi blackout for 2 days. The network team had come in and reset some of the access points. After that, we were asked to reconnect using our credentials. But I hadn't needed to. I'd expected to be locked out, but my phone had connected like always. I thought it was because my credentials hadn't changed. Maybe that was the mistake. I didn't sleep that night. I opened every log file I could find on my repeater. I checked timestamps, download sizes, IP requests. It was a pattern. From 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. every day, large amounts of data were being used. Even if I turned off my laptop and phone before bed, someone was definitely connecting through my repeater. I tried MAC address filtering. I blocked the unknown devices. The next night, they came back. Different MAC addresses this time. Same type of devices. It was like someone was rotating their hardware or spoofing addresses. I went to the IT help desk the next day. I didn't want to make a big deal, so I pretended to ask a casual question about our login system. The guy behind the desk didn't even look up. He muttered something about centralized login syncing with student databases and passwords being unique per device. I asked if passwords were ever repeated by mistake. He shrugged and said no, not unless someone manually copied and reused one. I went back to my room and opened a spreadsheet. I had a few friends in other wings of the hostel. I asked them to send me their Wi-Fi passwords. Some of them hesitated, but most didn't mind. We were all students. No one thought too much about it. When I lined them up, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Out of 10 passwords I collected, 3 were identical to mine. Same username, same password, but they were assigned to completely different people. Different student IDs, different rooms, even different wings of the hostel. I double-checked the login dashboard for the hostel network. There was again my name, my ID, my password. But somewhere in the back-end system, those credentials were assigned to multiple users. Somehow, several rooms had been issued the same password. That explained it. My repeater, which used saved login credentials, was effectively a bridge. If someone nearby had the same credentials, they could connect through my repeater even if they weren't in range of the main access point. And since I lived in a corner room with weak direct signal, my repeater was the only stable connection nearby. It was being hijacked, but it still didn't explain everything. Why did those unknown devices keep changing? Who were they? I walked through my wing, peeking at doors. Most were locked or shut. I knew some of the guys, but not all. On a hunch, I went to the second wing, across the central courtyard. It had a mirror layout to ours. I walked through their third floor, counting the rooms. I found one with the door open and glanced inside. There was a guy sitting at his desk with headphones on, gaming. I recognized the laptop model, the same one I'd seen in my repeater logs. I stepped back before he saw me. It didn't prove anything, but it felt like confirmation. Back in my room, I turned off the repeater. The next morning, I checked the logs again. No unusual activity. The outside devices had gone dark. For the first time in weeks, my bandwidth hadn't been drained overnight. That should have been the end of it, but I kept digging. I began compiling a list of usernames and passwords from classmates, anyone who was willing to share. I compared them and matched them with student IDs. Some had unique passwords, others had duplicates. In one case, 4 different students had the exact same credentials. I even found 2 students who had been assigned the same IP address when connected. That shouldn't happen. I realized then this wasn't just some glitch, it was systemic. A software bug. Maybe during the last password refresh cycle, the system had glitched. Maybe some entries had failed to update. So the server reused previous credentials across multiple accounts. And if those credentials weren't protected, anyone with technical know-how could piggyback off someone else's session. It explained why the speeds were terrible lately. Too many users, too much cross-traffic. Some wings were overloaded while others had barely any usage. I considered reporting it, but I didn't want to start a chain reaction. I didn't want to lose the repeater I had fought so hard to keep. So I made a choice. I changed the admin login on my repeater. I encrypted the connection. I disabled auto login for the Wi-Fi and forced manual sign-ins. I even set up a script to log every device that connected in real time. That night, someone tried again. The repeater log showed a connection attempt at 2:17 a.m. This time it was denied. No password prompt, just a silent block. The device kept retrying every few minutes until 4 a.m., then gave up. I knew someone had been counting on that access. Probably downloading stuff they couldn't risk doing on their own login. Or maybe they didn't even know they were hijacking someone else's bandwidth. Maybe they just thought the network was public. Over the next week, my connection improved. Pages loaded faster. Videos didn't buffer as much. But my trust in the system was gone. I stopped using the campus Wi-Fi for anything sensitive. I bought a data dongle and kept it for banking and important emails. I changed passwords regularly, even when I didn't need to. I became the guy who checked for strange MAC addresses every morning, the guy who watched his bandwidth like a hawk. Eventually, I sent an anonymous tip to the IT department. I explained the duplication issue, the password overlaps, the reused credentials. I attached some proof, logs, screenshots, a list of affected rooms. I never signed my name. 2 weeks later, they rolled out a forced password reset for the entire hostel. Everyone was locked out until they reset their credentials through a new web portal. The patch notes said something vague about authentication synchronization improvements. Most students groaned about the hassle. No one really knew why it was being done. But I did. That night, I turned on my repeater one last time. The logs were clean. No unknown devices. No overnight data spikes. Just my laptop, my phone. Everything the way it should have been from start. Still, I never stopped watching. Not after what I'd seen. The mistake had been so simple. One bad script, one lazy update, and suddenly, privacy was gone. Invisible wires crossed. Invisible doors left open. Sometimes, even now, I still wake up in the middle of the night and check the logs. I don't know what I expect to find. Probably nothing. But I'd rather know than guess. Because I've learned something I can't unlearn. When it comes to networks, nothing is ever as private as you think. When I first moved into the hostel, I didn't expect much. Just a bed, a desk for walls, and enough peace to get through my second year of college without losing my mind. I had spent the first year in a shared room with a guy who snored like a tractor and played video games with his headset on at full volume. I needed space. I needed silence. So when I heard that room 310 on the top floor was vacant, and had been for some time, I jumped at the chance. No roommates. No distractions. People said that room was always hot, even in winter, but I didn't care. I'd take heat over noise any day. The hostel didn't have air conditioning anyway, so what difference would it make? I packed my things, signed a new room allocation form at the warden's office, and moved in that same evening. It was early September, still hot outside, though the evenings were beginning to cool. When I opened the door to 310, I could feel the warmth hit me like a cushion of stale air. Still, it didn't seem unbearable. I figured it just needed to be aired out. I left the window open all night, but by morning, the room still felt strangely warm. Not like a sunny room, but like standing near a stove that had just been turned off. Residual heat, dull and thick. I noticed the walls were warm to the touch. Not hot, just noticeably warmer than they should have been. The floor too, especially near the corner where my bed was. I thought maybe it was the sun hitting that side of the building all day. That could make sense. I didn't think much of it. Classes started again the next week, and I fell into a routine: early lectures, afternoons in the library, evenings in the room. I spent a lot of time alone, which I liked. No one bothered me on the third floor. Most of the other rooms were occupied, but people kept to themselves. I listened to music, read, studied, browsed mindlessly. I didn't use the ceiling fan much because it just pushed around the warm air and made my throat dry. I bought a standing fan instead and kept it pointed straight at the bed at night. But after a while, the heat stopped feeling normal. It wasn't just hot, it felt wrong. The air felt heavy, like it was carrying something with it. I started waking up drenched in sweat, even when the nights outside were cool. My sheets were damp every morning. I changed them constantly. My clothes started to smell musty faster. I cleaned more often than I ever used to. Still, nothing helped. After 2 weeks, I noticed my head always hurt. Not sharp pain, just this low, dull pressure that never quite went away. It started in the mornings as soon as I woke up and stayed with me all day. At first, I thought I was dehydrated, so I drank more water. I cut out caffeine. I took paracetamol. Nothing worked. Some days it was so bad I skipped class just to lie down in the dark. I couldn't focus. I stopped going to the library. I started missing deadlines. I told myself it was stress. Maybe I wasn't adjusting well to the new term. I told myself the room wasn't that hot. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I kept the window open, ran both fans day and night, but nothing ever changed. One morning I woke up and my nose was bleeding. Just a few drops on the pillow, but enough to make me freeze. I hadn't had a nosebleed since I was a kid. I looked it up online: dry air, heat, stress. Maybe that explained it. But something about it unsettled me. Around the same time, I noticed something else. My phone would get hot when I left it on the desk, even if I wasn't using it. Same with my laptop. Not burning hot, but warmer than normal. One night, I left my phone charging on the desk, and it completely shut down. It wouldn't turn on for hours. When it finally did, it gave me a temperature warning. I started charging it outside the room in the hallway. I stopped sleeping properly. My eyes would pop open at random hours: 2 a.m., 3:30 a.m., with my heart racing and my back soaked in sweat. The room always felt like it was closing in on me, the air thick and unmoving. I started seeing little black spots float across my vision when I stood up too quickly. I chalked it up to dehydration again and kept chugging water. By mid-October, I started losing weight. Not a lot, but enough that my jeans felt loose. My appetite disappeared. Food tasted bland. My head felt like it was full of cotton, and I couldn't think straight. I'd stare at the same sentence in a textbook for 10 minutes and not absorb a word. I stopped hanging out with people entirely. I started skipping meals just so I wouldn't have to go to the dining hall and talk to anyone. I felt irritated all the time. Little noises made me flinch. My skin started to itch. My fingernails had little pale streaks running through them. I didn't tell anyone. One night, I was lying in bed, sweating through my shirt even though it was cool outside, and I suddenly felt a tightness in my chest. Not pain, exactly, just a pressure like someone was sitting on me. I tried to take a deep breath and couldn't. My vision blurred, and I felt lightheaded. I sat up, turned on the light, and looked at myself in the mirror across the room. My face looked pale and hollow. I could see the veins in my temples. Something was very wrong. I knew it then. Something was happening to me, and it wasn't just stress or heat or anything I could fix with water or a fan. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and tried to think back to what had changed. The only thing that made sense was the room itself. I remember what people had said, that 310 was always hotter than the others, that no one ever stayed in it long, but no one ever said why. I opened the window and leaned out, looking down at the side of the building. From that angle, I could just barely make out the ground floor. There was a small, square, windowless structure attached to the base of the hostel, just below my room. It looked like a shed made of concrete, with a single locked door and a warning sign on it. The next morning, I walked down to check it out. The sign said, "Danger, high voltage, transformer room." My stomach turned. I remembered hearing a low hum every night, like a far-off engine. I thought it was just city noise. But now, standing in front of that door, I could feel a vibration through the ground. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was warm. Back in my room, I checked online for how transformer rooms worked, what they did, how much heat they gave off, whether they were dangerous. The information wasn't easy to understand, but a few things stood out. Transformer rooms could give off low-level radiation and significant heat. Proper shielding and insulation were essential. Without it, the heat and electromagnetic fields could leak upward, especially into rooms directly above. I found a building schematic posted years ago on a campus blog. Room 310 was directly above that transformer room. It shouldn't have been used for sleeping quarters at all. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they just needed the space and hoped no one would notice. I went to the warden's office that afternoon and said I wanted to switch rooms. I said mine was too hot, that I wasn't sleeping, that I was getting sick. He looked at me for a second, then said room changes weren't possible midterm unless there was a serious issue. I asked him if he knew what was below room 310. He didn't answer right away. Then he said he'd look into it. I didn't wait. That evening, I packed up everything I owned and moved it to the corridor. I slept in the common room on the second floor. The next morning, I went straight to student housing services and told them the full story. Not just about the heat, but the nosebleeds, the headaches, the electronics, overheating, everything. They didn't take me seriously at first. Thought I was exaggerating. But I kept pushing. I emailed them articles, links, and the building plan I found online. I showed them pictures of my room's temperature readings. I demanded someone inspect the transformer room and measure the electromagnetic levels in 310. A week later, I got called in. They'd done some tests. Turns out the shielding above the transformer room had been damaged during renovations 2 years ago and never fixed. Room 310 had been flagged as non-residential in the original building plans, but someone had overruled it during a hostile reshuffle the year before. Paperwork mistake, they said. They moved me into a regular double room on the first floor. I didn't care that I had a roommate again. I was just glad to be out of that place. I still had the headaches for a while. The doctor said it might take time to get back to normal. My sleep slowly improved. The nosebleed stopped. I started eating properly again. I passed my exams barely. They sealed off room 310 permanently after that. Put a sign on the door and everything. I heard they were planning to renovate the whole top floor to make it storage instead of living space. No one ever said anything publicly. No apology. No warning to the others. Just quietly erased it like it never happened. But I remember. I still get a little sick thinking about that place. The way the air felt, the way the heat clung to your skin like a disease. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was just broken, forgotten. And I had lived inside it for 6 weeks, soaking in that invisible damage, slowly unraveling, with no one to see it happen. No one to stop it. Now, whenever I walk past a building and feel that strange hum in the concrete, I think of that room. And I keep walking. I don't look back. It started with socks. Not mine at first, but from people on my floor. I live in a student hostel about 15 minutes from campus. It's one of those older ones, the kind that was built probably in the 80s or 90s. Peeling paint in the stairwells, water stains on some ceilings, and a constant low hum of conversation and laughter from somewhere, no matter the hour. It's not terrible, not great either. Rent's cheap, so I stay. The laundry area was a shared space on the ground floor. Not inside the building, but in a small courtyard out back, right past the old bicycle rack, and just before the chain link fence that separates our building from the construction site next door. They were building something new there, some private hostel or maybe a commercial space. There was scaffolding, cement mixers, broken bricks, and dust in the air all the time. It was noisy during the day, but quiet at night. I never thought much of the laundry drying area. It was just metal rods cemented into the ground with rows of plastic lines tied across. We'd all hang our washed clothes there to dry because most of us couldn't afford dryers. I'd hang my shirts, jeans, and boxers on the lines every 2 or 3 days and pick them up later in the evening or the next morning. It worked fine for the most part. But then people started talking about missing clothes. It was small at first, just a few socks, a towel here and there, someone's gym shorts. We joked that it was probably the wind or someone picking up someone else's stuff by accident. But then it started getting worse. One girl on the third floor said she lost 2 pairs of leggings and a sports bra. Another guy swore he lost 3 t-shirts in 1 week. People started getting annoyed. Someone printed a paper that said, "Stop stealing laundry," and taped it near the laundry area. No one knew who was doing it. Some thought maybe a dog got into the area and dragged stuff away. Others thought it was someone from the hostel playing a prank. I didn't think too much of it until one of my shirts disappeared. It was a navy blue long sleeve I'd only worn twice. I'd washed it with my regular load and hung it up around noon on a Sunday. That evening when I went down to collect it, everything was there except the shirt. I checked every line, thinking I might have hung it somewhere else. I even looked on the ground and under the bushes near the fence. Nothing. It was gone. Losing a shirt wasn't the end of the world, but something about it fell off. I definitely hung it there. No windstorm came through that day. The clips were still on the line. Someone had to have taken it. I started to feel the same frustration everyone else had. Over the next 2 weeks, I kept an eye on my clothes. I started hanging them only when I knew I'd be around to collect them in a few hours. I thought that would stop it, but I was wrong. Even with that, one of my towels disappeared on a Wednesday afternoon. I had gone down, hung up my laundry around 1 p.m., and came back at 5. Everything was there except the towel. A white one with a gray stripe on one end. It was just gone. That's when I started getting more serious about it. I began keeping track of what I hung out, what time I did it, and what time I picked it up. I even started writing it down. I didn't trust anyone anymore. I thought maybe someone in the hostel was taking things and trying to be slick about it, but I couldn't figure out who. There were about 70 or 80 students in the building, spread across 4 floors. Everyone was always coming and going. Some stayed up all night, some went home on weekends. It could have been anyone. One night, after my 3rd missing item, a pair of track pants, I decided I'd stay up and watch. Not just from my window. I wanted to be close enough to see who was taking stuff. It was a Thursday. I waited until past midnight when the courtyard was empty. I didn't want to seem suspicious, so I told one of my neighbors I was going out to smoke and maybe read a bit. I didn't smoke, but that excuse worked. I took an old hoodie, a plastic chair, and a notebook, and I sat in the far corner of the courtyard near the bushes. I wore all black and tucked myself between the thick branches and the metal fence. From there, I could see the entire drying area. At first, nothing happened. It was quiet. A few students came down late to pick up their clothes, but after 1 a.m., the place was empty. The windows above were mostly dark, except for 1 or 2 lit by computer screens or desk lamps. I stayed quiet and still. At around 2:15, I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a cat, but then I saw a human shape near the edge of the courtyard, near the side gate. The side gate was usually locked. It wasn't an official entry point. It was mostly there for emergencies. But during a recent fire drill, someone said they'd unlocked it for inspection. This figure moved quickly and silently. He was wearing a dull blue shirt and faded pants. I recognized the kind of uniform construction workers around here wore. He had a cloth bag slung over one shoulder and a cap pulled low over his face. I didn't move. I watched as he walked up to the drying lines like he'd done 100 times before. He looked around for a second, didn't see me, then started grabbing clothes. Not everything, just certain pieces. T-shirts, jeans, some athletic wear. He moved fast, folding them roughly and stuffing them into the bag. I felt frozen. My hands were shaking a little, but I didn't want to scare him off yet. I needed to know how he got in. After maybe 3 minutes, he turned and walked back to the side gate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something, maybe a piece of wire or an old key. He fiddled with the gate and it opened. He slipped out and closed it behind him like he belonged there. I waited until I was sure he was gone, then slowly got up and went to the gate. It had a lock, but it wasn't latched. Someone must have forgotten to secure it properly after the fire safety team came through a couple of weeks ago. It looked shut, but if you pushed it would swing over. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I decided to skip class and went to the construction site next to our building. There were several workers moving around, mixing cement, lifting bricks, carrying boards. I walked slowly, scanning their faces. Then I saw him. The same dull blue shirt, same faded pants, same cap. He was lifting a sack of sand into a wheelbarrow. I looked away before he could notice me. Now I knew who it was and how he got in. But that still left the question. Why? Why steal laundry? That weekend, I went to the Sunday flea market 2 blocks away. I'd been there before. It was a chaotic, dusty stretch of booths and tents where people sold secondhand clothes, phone covers, shoes, tools, snacks, anything cheap. I walked row by row, keeping an eye out for anything familiar. After 20 minutes, I saw it. My navy blue long-sleeve shirt, the one that had disappeared weeks ago. It was hanging on a rack along with other shirts. The stall was manned by a short man who looked nothing like the construction guy, but I saw the blue shirt worker nearby, helping fold clothes and carry things in and out of the van. It was them. They were stealing and selling our clothes here. I took a photo of the stall from a distance and the man working there. I didn't confront them. I wasn't stupid. I left and went straight to the hostel office. I showed the photos to the building supervisor and explained everything, from a missing laundry to the unlocked side gate to the construction worker I saw sneaking in. At first, they were skeptical, but when I pointed out that the lock on the side gate was still broken, they began taking me more seriously. The hostel called the construction company that same day. There were meetings, inspections, a lot of talking behind closed doors. I wasn't part of all that, but I heard later that the worker had been let go. Apparently, he admitted to slipping in through the side gate several times during the night. He said he sold the clothes to earn extra cash. He claimed he only took things that looked abandoned, which was a lie, but it didn't matter. He was fired. The hostel replaced the lock on the gate and welded a metal bar across it to make sure no one could enter without a key. They also installed a small security camera near the drying area, aimed at the lines. After that, the theft stopped completely. No one else lost anything again. I stopped watching from the bushes. I went back to hanging my clothes like before. It didn't feel like a victory, just a quiet end. I still wonder how many things he took in total. How many people never realized their stuff was stolen and just assumed they lost it. He must have taken dozens, maybe even hundreds of items over the weeks. But at least now it was over. I still do laundry on Sundays. The sun still hits the lines at a good angle around 2 p.m. The air smells of soap and detergent, and sometimes the faint scent of flower from bush nearby. I never told anyone else how I caught it. Not because I want to keep it a secret, but because people stopped caring once it ended. Life moved on. Assignments piled up. Exams came. The courtyard stayed quiet at night again. And I went back to sleeping peacefully with all my clothes drying just outside where they belong. I first noticed the sound during the second week of September, right after our mid-semester break-in. The weather had just started to cool down at night, and we were still allowed to keep the hostel air conditioning running for a few more weeks before the administration decided it was unnecessary. I had been lying on my bed in my room on the second floor of Block B, flipping through lecture slides on my phone, trying to find a reason to care about an upcoming internal assessment. At first, I thought it was just wind, a soft, faint hiss, like air escaping through a slit. But it wasn't consistent. It would start and stop, break into short bursts, or sometimes just one long string like someone breathing through their teeth. I ignored it the first few times. These old hostels always had something broken or loose. Sometimes the plumbing made knocking sounds. Sometimes lights flickered for no reason. You get used to it. But then one night, I heard something that wasn't just hissing. I was lying on my side, staring at the wall opposite my bed. My roommate was gone for the weekend. He had gone home for his cousin's engagement. The ceiling fan was off because I decided to use the AC, but the compressor outside our window made this constant buzzing hum, so the room wasn't exactly quiet. Then I heard it. It was a murmur, very soft. At first, it sounded like my own thoughts echoing in my head. But when I sat up and the blanket fell off my chest, I noticed the direction of the sound. It was coming from inside the wall. I leaned closer to the corner where the AC vent was installed. The room had a duct air conditioning system, not the split unit type. There was a square metal grill about a foot wide, just above the wardrobe. Cool air came through that during the day. But at night, even when the AC was set to low, something strange came with it. A voice. No, not quite a voice. A whisper. Not words I could understand, but the definite rhythm of human speech. Soft consonants, slight gaps like pauses between sentences, and a rising falling pattern that only language has. I got up on my chair and leaned in closer, almost pressing my ear against the vent. It wasn't just one whisper. It was multiple, layered, slightly overlapping. I thought maybe someone was standing in the hallway, talking softly. I turned off the AC with the wall remote, and the low hum from the fan stopped. But the whispering didn't. I opened the door and peered into the corridor. Dark, silent. I walked to the stairwell and looked down toward the ground floor. Nothing. The whole block was asleep. When I came back into my room, the whispers had stopped. That was the first night. The second night, it returned. It was almost exactly the same time, past 1 a.m. The whispering started again from the vent. I didn't get up to check. I just stayed in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep for hours. Over the next few days, I started asking other people. I kept it casual. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I brought it up during dinner as a joke. Have you guys ever heard weird sounds in your rooms at night? Like whispering? The guy from the room across mine, Samir, nodded immediately. Yeah, man. It's like voices. I thought I was dreaming. Another one, Ramesh, said he thought it was coming from the rooms below. But no one's awake at that time, he said. I even checked downstairs one night. All dark. That's when I knew it wasn't just me. It became a kind of unspoken topic in our block. People started making memes about haunted vents and sharing them in our floor's WhatsApp group. Some guys claimed they couldn't sleep without earphones anymore. A few even shifted their mattresses to the far end of the room, away from the AC vents. But no one really investigated. No one thought it was serious. It was just one of those hostile things. I couldn't leave it at that. It started affecting my sleep. I'd lie awake, waiting for the whispers. They didn't always come. Some nights were quiet, but when they did, I'd feel a kind of slow panic crawling into my chest. I kept telling myself it had to be something explainable. Maybe the air ducts carried sound from nearby rooms, or maybe some prankster was using a Bluetooth speaker to mess with us. So one night I decided to track it. It was a Tuesday. I remember because we had a pharmacology test the next morning and I didn't feel like studying. I waited until 1:15 a.m. Then the whispering began. Faint, but definitely present. I put on my hoodie, slipped into my sandals, grabbed my phone and a small torch, and left my room. The whispering wasn't in the hallway. I moved quietly down the corridor, tried to figure out if it came from the ceiling or from any open doors. But the building was dead silent. I went up to the third floor, then the fourth. Each time, the same thing. No one was awake, but the whispering seemed to fade the further I went up. So I went down instead. On the first floor, I could hear the sound again, faintly. But on the ground floor, it became a little louder. I leaned close to the duct in the common area near the water cooler. It wasn't air. It was definitely voice. Faint, fuzzy, like someone talking through layers of walls and pipes. That's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The air conditioning duct in the common area was wide, industrial, like the kind you see in malls or hospitals. It wasn't individual to each room. It was a central duct system, a main line that split off into smaller branches to each room. I started tracing the duct. The main pipeline disappeared into the ceiling at one corner of the corridor. I knew that direction. That was the boundary wall of our hostel. And beyond that wall, just 50 feet away, was the engineering block. Something clicked. I stood there in the dim glow from the emergency light above the stairwell, staring at the ceiling. Could the duct system be connected? I knew a few of the engineers had late-night labs or workshops. They had project deadlines. It wasn't rare to see lights on in their building at 2 a.m. I walked out through the rear gate. The night was warm. A few insects buzzed under the tube lights. The security guard was asleep in his chair, a newspaper folded on his lap. I slipped past him and walked toward the engineering block. The building was mostly dark, except for a pale glow from one of the basement windows. That part of the building was half sunk into the ground and had a separate entry ramp. I walked around the side and crouched near a ventilation grill. It was warm, and I could feel air blowing out. Inside, I could hear them. Voices. Clear now. Just normal conversation. Laptops clacking. Someone asking something in a low voice. A few laughs. Coffee being poured. It was a late-night project group. Probably final years trying to meet a deadline. Maybe a robotics team or an electronics batch. Nothing scary, nothing strange. But then I looked up. The air vent above their room, large, steel, circular, was the same design as the one in our block. Same brackets, same gauge. It had to be the same system. I didn't sleep that night, but for a different reason. My head was racing, not from fear, but from trying to piece everything together. I started looking up floor plans online. I found a site that had basic layouts of the campus infrastructure. Nothing very detailed, but enough to show that both our hostel block and the engineering block were built during the same expansion year, probably contracted by the same firm. And that meant it was possible the HVAC system, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, was shared between both buildings. That's why the whispering had a strange reverb. It was sound traveling through metal ducts, bouncing off walls, echoing down tubes, distorted by layers of insulation and dust. That's why it wasn't always clear why it felt like speech but didn't make sense. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't hallucination. It was just engineers. But the realization didn't help everyone. When I told a few of the guys what I'd found, most laughed. One said I had too much time on my hands. Another said I should make a reel about it. But a few others seemed relieved. They said they'd suspected something like that. It made sense. But some didn't believe me. They said it was still creepy. That the sounds didn't match any real words. That some of the whispers happened even when the engineering block was dark. I couldn't explain that. Maybe sound took longer to travel through the ducts and got delayed. Maybe other rooms were used at night without lights. Or maybe they were just imagining things once they knew the system existed. I stopped listening to the vent after that. I started using earplugs, then shifted my study routine so I'd be asleep by midnight. I stopped caring when the whispers came. I had exams coming up. I didn't want to lose sleep over something that had a clear, boring explanation. Eventually, the ACs were shut off for winter. The ducts fell silent. Not a whisper. The noise didn't come back, even after summer started again. That's when we found out the engineering block had finally gotten its own AC upgrade. A whole new unit was installed for their labs. The old system was decommissioned. The whispering never returned. Sometimes I still think about those nights. How something so simple, so completely explainable, could mess with our heads so much. All it took was a bit of confusion, some isolation, and strange timing. Whispering vents became a ghost story for our floor. Some juniors still ask about it, but no one hears it anymore. I never told the hostel warden, never filed a complaint. I figured it was over. It was just bad infrastructure. Just poorly planned building design. Nothing else. But I still sleep with earplugs. Just in case. I didn't think much of it when I first heard about a few students getting sick on the 4th floor. Upset stomachs, vomiting, diarrhea. Nothing unusual for a college dorm, where people ate from questionable street stalls and kept their rooms less than clean. But when it started happening to more people, always from the same floor, always with the same symptoms, I began to wonder if something else was going on. I lived on the 2nd floor of the hostel in one of the older dormitories of our university. It was a plain 5-story concrete building, nothing fancy. Narrow hallways, buzzing fluorescent lights, shared bathrooms with rusting pipes and low water pressure, and paper-thin walls. My room was small but functional, single bed, desk, cupboard, and a cracked window that never closed properly. Nothing out of the ordinary. I had lived there for over a year without problems. But it was the 4th floor that changed everything. At first, it was just Arun, a quiet guy who kept to himself. Then it was 3 others the next day. A week later, nearly a dozen students on that floor were down with the same symptoms: persistent nausea, vomiting, cramping, diarrhea, low-grade fever. Some had to be hospitalized for dehydration. People joked it was a bad batch of chicken curry from the canteen or a virus going around. But nobody else in the building was sick. Not on the 3rd floor, not the 5th, and not us on the lower floors. Just the 4th. I started to notice patterns. One of my friends, Rishi, often hung out with a guy from the 4th floor and spent the night there a couple of times. Sure enough, 3 days later, he was sick too. He threw up all over our shared bathroom and had to be taken to the health center. He recovered after a few days, but that's when I started digging. It wasn't any kind of virus. If it were, it would have spread randomly. but this was restricted to a single floor. That made no sense unless something specific to that floor was the source. I started asking around quietly, keeping track of who had symptoms and who didn't. I even made a list on my phone, organizing it by room numbers. The pattern was undeniable. It was something on the fourth floor. I started spending more time up there, just wandering the hallways, pretending to be looking for someone, or hanging out in the common area. The bathrooms smelled faintly sour, even though they were cleaned regularly. The water from the taps looked normal at first, but once I filled a glass and let it sit, a faint yellowish tint started to appear. I sniffed it. It didn't smell like chlorine or anything sharp, just a dull, metallic odor. The fourth floor's water was off somehow. I ran a little test. I filled 2 identical bottles, one from my floor and one from the fourth. I labeled them discreetly and put them in my closet for a few days. When I opened them again, the difference was obvious. The second bottle had a brownish residue along the sides and an oily film on the surface. It smelled like old metal, like rusty tools after rain. The bottle from my floor was fine. I didn't know what I was looking at exactly, but I knew it wasn't right. I started reading about water contamination, specifically how rust and bacteria can build up inside used or damaged pipelines. That's when something clicked in my head. A few months back, there had been a big water supply shut down for maintenance. They had dug up the area behind our hostel, blocked off the supply for a weekend, and done some pipe replacement work. I remembered the notices, the buckets of stored water we were told to keep in our rooms, and the general chaos. After it was over, everything seemed to go back to normal. But maybe it hadn't. Maybe something had gone wrong in that process. I visited the campus maintenance office under the excuse of needing old utility records for a class project. The man at the front desk was bored and didn't ask too many questions. He handed over a stack of blueprints, some from the time of construction and some updated more recently. I sat there and compared the layouts of the water systems between the floors. Something stood out. There was an old underground water line marked in blue ink on the original plans. It ran underneath the building and had been marked decommissioned in a later revision. But in the most recent update, that line had been reconnected, specifically to the fourth floor's water line, as part of the rerouting done during the recent maintenance work. I stared at it for a long time. They had reconnected an old pipe that hadn't been used in years. If what I'd read was right, such pipes can collect rust, sludge, and microbial buildup if left unused for long periods. And if that pipe had cracks or leaks underground, it could easily be a source of contamination, especially if it was near a sewage line or another compromised water path. The staff had probably ignored the original status of the line and simply reconnected it to complete the reroute faster. I went back to my room with the blueprints folded tightly in my bag. I couldn't stop thinking about the risk. Bacteria like E. coli, Giardia, or even rust-loving microbes could easily make people sick if consumed. The symptoms matched what people on the fourth floor were experiencing. Still, I wasn't sure. I needed more evidence. I borrowed a water testing kit from a friend in the environmental science department. I told him I was curious about the tap water, nothing more. It came with strips, small containers, and a guide on how to read results for things like iron, pH, nitrates, chlorine, and bacteria. I tested water from my floor and the fourth again. My results showed elevated iron and bacterial presence in the fourth floor sample. It was subtle, but enough to be worrying. The iron levels were higher than the safe limit, and the bacterial markers showed signs of coliforms. The water was not safe to drink. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the students still living up there, still using that water to brush their teeth, to drink, to wash their faces. Even if they were boiling it or using filters, the contamination might be enough to cause illness. And the administration hadn't said a word. I decided to act. First, I compiled everything I had, photos of the dirty water, test results, the blueprint copies, the list of 6 students with dates and room numbers, and notes on the maintenance work timeline. I printed it all out and wrote a short summary explaining my findings. It took most of the night. The next morning, I went straight to the warden's office. He wasn't there. I waited. Then I tried the health center. I found the nurse who had treated many of the 6 students. She looked tired but listened. I handed her the folder and explained everything, trying to stay calm and factual. Later that day, she called me. She had passed the report to the campus sanitation team and the engineering office. Within 2 days, they were inspecting the fourth floor pipes. I stayed out of the way, but I saw them with their tools and scanners, opening ceiling panels, accessing maintenance hatches. Then I saw the expressions on their faces. They looked worried. They found a problem. The old underground pipe had been reconnected during the rerouting work after the maintenance shutdown. It had not been properly flushed or cleaned. Worse, it had a small crack near one of the joints underground. Water from surrounding soil, possibly contaminated by nearby sewage drainage, had been seeping into it. Rust, sediment, and bacteria had built up inside, and that water had been going straight to the fourth floor. It wasn't sabotage or a deliberate mistake. It was negligence. The team had used an outdated blueprint during the repair and didn't check the original decommissioning notes. They had connected a dangerous line into a live water system without verifying its integrity. The administration acted fast after that. The fourth floor water line was shut off immediately. Temporary water tanks were brought in. They flushed and disinfected all the pipes. Some sections had to be replaced entirely. The cracked underground line was sealed off properly this time. The engineering staff involved received formal reprimands. Students who had fallen sick were offered compensation for medical expenses and an apology. But most importantly, the sickness stopped. Within a week of the repairs, no new cases were reported. Those still recovering improved quickly. The bad water was gone. No announcement was made to the entire hostel. It was all handled quietly, internally. But I knew what had happened. I saw the mistake, the chain of oversight, and how easily it could have continued unnoticed. If I hadn't been curious, if I hadn't asked questions, how long would it have gone on? How many more students would have gotten sick? The whole thing left a bitter taste in my mouth. Not just the water, but the way it was handled. A simple maintenance decision, a wrong line connected, and dozens of students had fallen ill. The institution's internal systems weren't built to catch such things. It took someone on the inside noticing the details. After that, I kept looking at the walls, the ceilings, the pipes differently. I kept wondering what else was hidden behind concrete and metal. What else might be slowly going wrong without anyone knowing? I still lived in that hostel for the rest of the year, but I never drank from the tap again. I boiled everything. I used filters. I filled reports if I saw the slightest issue. It made me paranoid, maybe, but also made me aware. Water is something we take for granted. You open the tap and assume it's clean. But one hidden pipe, one forgotten section of infrastructure can change everything. I never got sick, but I could have. We all could have. And now I know what to look for. I got back to my hostel room later than usual that day. It was a Tuesday, somewhere between early February and midterm break, and the evenings had started feeling colder, especially after sunset. I had gone out to the library after class and then wandered around town for a bit. I didn't really need to go anywhere in particular. I just didn't want to sit in my room all day. I'd signed out at the reception around 2 p.m., same as always. Some hostels made it optional, but in ours, we were told to do it. They had a clipboard at the front desk with a sheet to write your name, room number, and the time you left. I never thought twice about it. When I unlocked my room and pushed the door open, I noticed something strange almost immediately. It smelled different. Not bad, just different. There was a faint trace of some kind of deodorant I didn't use. I paused at the door for a few seconds. My room was the same size as all the others. One narrow bed pushed up against the right wall, a desk and chair on the left, a built-in cupboard at the foot of the bed, and a small window above the desk. Everything looked normal at first, but as I stepped in and closed the door behind me, I noticed my bed sheets were creased in a way they usually weren't. I always made my bed before I left. Always. That day was no exception. I dropped my bag on the floor and leaned over the bed. The top sheet was slightly pulled back, and my pillow was angled oddly. I put my hand on the sheet, and it was warm. Not just body temperature warm, like it had retained some heat. It felt like someone had just been lying on it, not more than 20 minutes ago. I stood there for a full minute, not moving, staring at the bed. The window was shut. My cupboard was closed and locked, same as I had left it. Nothing was missing from the desk. My phone charger was plugged in the same spot. The single slipper I had left beside my bed was still there, but I noticed my desk chair wasn't in its usual place. It was pushed further out, angled slightly like someone had sat in it, and turned it a bit before standing up and not bothering to push it back in properly. That wasn't me. I was the kind of person who pushed things back exactly where they were, especially in a small room like that, where space mattered. I tried not to jump to conclusions. Maybe the cleaners had come in for some routine maintenance and just sat down for a minute. But they never touched the bed. In fact, they only came on Thursdays. And this was Tuesday. I've been in the room long enough to know their schedule. Besides, the cleaners always came in groups. 2 at least. And they wore heavy boots and made enough noise that you could always hear them outside before they entered. I would have heard if anyone had entered earlier in the morning. But I've been in the room until 2 p.m. and no one had come by. It didn't sit right with me. I checked the door. Still locked from the inside. The lock wasn't broken or forced. I even tried locking and unlocking it again to test it. It clicked the same as always. No sign of tampering. I didn't know what to think. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I also couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in my room. Someone who wasn't supposed to be. I tried to forget about it, got ready for bed, and told myself I was overthinking. But I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept imagining someone standing in the room while I was out, just lying in my bed, staring at the ceiling. I woke up multiple times, listening for footsteps, even though I knew the building was quiet at night. The next morning, I checked the sheet again. It was cold now, obviously, but the pillow still seemed compressed in a way I didn't like. I skipped breakfast and went straight to class. The day went by in a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I mentioned it casually to one of my classmates, but only half seriously, like a joke. They just laughed and said maybe I had a sleepwalker roommate. I didn't. It was a single room, and it didn't help. That night, before heading out, I had an idea. I had an old smartphone in my cupboard that still worked. It didn't have a SIM card anymore, but the camera and recording still worked fine. I charged it up, deleted all the old photos and videos, and set it up on the bookshelf above my desk, angled toward the bedroom door. It wasn't perfect, but it would catch most of the room if someone walked in. I opened the video app, hit record, and made sure the red light wasn't visible. Then I left the room again and signed out. Same as usual, a bit after noon. I stayed out until just before sunset. When I got back, the first thing I noticed was the same smell again. Not strong, but familiar now. That same faint deodorant scent, the one I didn't use. The chair was angled the same way again. My bedsheet had the same slight fold near the pillow. And when I touched the blanket, it was warm again. I closed the door slowly and didn't turn on the light. I just stood there for a full 5 minutes, not moving, trying to listen for any signs of life. Nothing. I locked the door again, pulled the phone from the shelf, and plugged it into my laptop. The video was 2 hours long. I skipped through the first 30 minutes and almost dropped the laptop when I saw it. The door opened slowly. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a uniform, but he had an ID card clipped to his belt. He looked like a staff member, maybe maintenance or admin. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looked around, then closed the door behind him. He locked it. I watched as he took off his shoes, placed them beside the door, walked straight to the bed, pulled the blanket aside, and lay down. He didn't look around much, didn't touch anything else. Just lay down, pulled the blanket over himself, and closed his eyes. He stayed that way for over an hour. I kept watching, heart pounding in my chest. Around the 90-minute mark, he sat up, adjusted the pillow, and stood. He walked over to the desk, sat in the chair, leaned back, and stared at the wall. Then he checked his phone, stood again, and quietly put his shoes back on. Before leaving, he smoothed the bed slightly, repositioned the pillow, and unlocked the door. Then he walked out and shut it behind him. The whole thing made my skin crawl. He had a key, a master key. That was the only explanation. There was no other way he could have unlocked the door. No sign of forced entry, no window access, just that key. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the main light on and sat upright in bed, holding a metal water bottle in case someone tried to come in again. Every creak in the hallway made my heart race. By morning, I had a plan. I went to the warden's office. I didn't show the video yet. I just asked about the staff and who had access to the rooms. She said only the cleaning crew, the security supervisor, and a few senior admin staff had keys. That was all. I asked if rooms were ever used for anything else during the day. Spare offices, temporary storage, anything like that. She said no, definitely not. All occupied rooms were off limits unless there was an emergency. I thanked her and left. I didn't want to accuse anyone without being sure, but I couldn't let it go. That evening, I set up the phone again. Same position. I signed out again at 2 p.m. But this time I waited outside across from the building entrance where I had a view of my hallway window. I stayed behind the corner wall, just enough to see if anyone entered my building during that time. Around 3:15 p.m., I saw him again. The same man, same face, same clothes. He walked up the steps like he belonged there. Confident, not sneaky. He had something in his hand, maybe a drink or a snack. He reached the top, pulled a key from his pocket, and went in. 5 minutes later, he left again. No pity. I waited another hour, then went back to my room. The smell was there again. The bed was still warm. The chair was moved. The phone recorded everything, just like before. That night, I saved both videos along with the hallway footage I recorded from outside and copied everything to a USB drive. I walked straight to the warden's office the next morning and asked if I could speak privately. I didn't wait for small talk. I pulled out the USB and handed it over. I told her everything. No accusations, just facts. I told her the times, the dates, and what I'd noticed. Then I told her about the footage. She didn't say much. She just nodded and said she would look into it immediately. I left her office feeling half numb. I didn't know what to expect. 2 days passed. Then I got a call from her assistant asking me to come by. When I arrived, the warden was there with 2 other staff members I didn't recognize, senior ones, judging by their formal clothes. They thanked me, calmly, and said the matter had been handled. They didn't go into detail, but they confirmed that the man in the video was a mid-level admin staff member who had access to the master keys. He'd been using his access to nap in empty rooms during the day. Apparently, he'd been doing it for weeks, maybe months. He assumed the rooms were vacant when students signed out. He didn't take anything, didn't damage anything, but he had violated access rules. They said he'd been dismissed from duty immediately after viewing the footage. That was the end of it. They changed my room lock, gave me a new key. I was offered the option to move to a different room, but I declined. I just wanted things to go back to normal. But I never signed out again, not even once. Even if I was gone for 2 days, I kept my name off the clipboard. I also kept the old phone camera in place for weeks after, just in case. It never caught anything after that. I told a few close friends eventually, but most people wouldn't have believed it unless they saw the footage. Even now, when I think back on it, it doesn't feel like something that happened to me. It feels like something you read online or hear in a rumor. But it was real, every detail. And the worst part is, if I hadn't come back early that day, I moved into the hostel at the start of the second semester because my off-campus housing arrangement fell apart. The place wasn't terrible, just old. The building had 5 floors, each split into 2 wings, east and west. I was placed in room 314, west wing, 3rd floor. The east wing on that same floor was under renovation, or so the administration said. I remember during check-in, the warden told me that several wings were closed off for improvement work, and we weren't supposed to wander around them. I didn't think much of it. The building had cracks in the tiles, some leaky pipes, and most windows had rusted hinges, so renovation sounded like a reasonable excuse. The strange part was how they blocked off those wings. Not with construction signs or tape warnings. They simply didn't exist. No door numbers, no wing markers, nothing. Just blank white corridors with locked double doors. And it wasn't only the east wing of the 3rd floor. 2 entire floors had these sections with no markings at all. If someone didn't know the building's layout, they'd never notice them. From the main staircase, those corridors looked like janitor closets or sealed off storerooms. I only noticed because I'm the kind of person who gets curious about things like that. The students who'd been living there longer had theories. Some said they were storage. Others said it was for faculty use. One guy said they'd once used those wings for quarantine during an outbreak years ago and left them empty after. None of it added up, especially considering I saw lights on behind those locked double doors on some nights. And once I thought I saw someone walk past the frosted glass from the inside. I try not to obsess over it at first. I told myself I was imagining things, and even if I wasn't, it wasn't any of my business. But then little things started bothering me. First, I noticed that the hostel staff avoided the unmarked sections like they were under strict orders. The cleaning ladies would sweep every floor, but never go near those doors. If I asked about them, they'd shrug or change the subject. One evening, I stayed late in the common room, and I saw one of the maintenance guys unlock one of those double doors using a magnetic card. He didn't notice me. I stood behind a wall, watching through a reflection on the glass panel of the fire extinguisher. The hallway beyond looked like any other. White walls, tube lights, tiled floor, but it was fully functional. Clean, lived in. That was the moment I decided I'd figure out what was going on. I started casually asking around, trying not to sound too interested. One of the wardens told me the east wings were not in use, and the admin staff gave me the usual line about ongoing renovations. But I knew better now. Renovation doesn't mean working tube lights, working Wi-Fi routers, or uniformed staff entering and exiting quietly after hours. Whatever was going on there wasn't renovation. So I started watching. At night, when things got quiet, I'd hang out in the hallway, pretending to be on calls or scrolling through my phone. I noticed patterns. The east wing door on the third floor opened exactly once each night around 9:45 p.m. A man in plain clothes, early 30s, always carrying a folder, would enter or exit, never staying longer than 5 minutes. Sometimes he had others with him. Once I saw a woman carrying a laptop bag. Another time, 2 guys came out together, both wearing what looked like admin ID tags. But these people weren't professors or anyone I'd seen on campus. They didn't even look like students. Clean-shaven, neat, corporate-looking types. They didn't fit in. It didn't take long before my curiosity turned into an obsession. I wanted to get in. I knew it was risky, but it gnawed at me. I thought about it every time I passed those blank doors. So one weekend, I made a plan. I waited until Saturday night, when the activity seemed lowest. I wore dark clothes, pulled my hoodie tight, and brought along a pair of flathead screwdrivers from the maintenance closet on the first floor. I figured I could use them to open the lock or pry the door from the hinge, if necessary. Looking back, I must have looked ridiculous, some kid trying to play spy. But I was determined. To my surprise, the lock wasn't complex. It was a card reader, yes, but the latch itself was old. I didn't need to mess with the card mechanism. I simply slid a piece of laminated cardboard I'd cut from a notebook cover between the latch and the frame. It clicked open after a few tries. My heart raced like crazy. I pushed the door open slowly and slipped inside. The hallway was silent. Cool air blew from overhead vents. It smelled different, cleaner. The tiles were polished. The walls had fresh paint. The lights weren't flickering or yellow. Everything felt new. This wasn't a place under renovation. This was a fully functional, upgraded section of the hostel. But no one had ever mentioned that such upgrades even existed. I moved slowly, checking each door. Room 301A. Room 301B. Room 301C. Every door was labeled inside this wing, unlike the exterior hallway. And every room had a peephole, a nameplate, and a magnetic lock. I walked past maybe 10 rooms before I heard movement. Footsteps, soft and regular, coming from the far end. I ducked into a corner near a fire hose cabinet and held my breath. A young man walked by, late 20s, wearing formals. No tie, just a tucked-in shirt and dark trousers. He had an ID card clipped to his belt loop. He looked like a corporate intern. He didn't glance around, didn't notice me. He walked to one of the rooms, tapped his card, and went inside. Once the door shut, I stepped back into the hallway and hurried to the room he'd entered. I looked at the nameplate, R. Day, Admin Intern. That was the first time I saw it labeled clearly. Admin Intern. I checked the rest of the doors. Almost every room had the same label. S. Mara, Admin Intern, J. Core, Admin Intern, and so on. It suddenly clicked. These weren't students. These were interns from the admin department. But what the hell were they doing living here, inside a hostel that was supposed to be for students? I kept walking, carefully peeking into open cracks of doors where I could. I passed a common area, new sofas, LED lights, even a vending machine. Another hallway turned toward what looked like a small lounge with a coffee machine. Everything was clean, polished, like an executive hostel. Then I heard voices, not conversations, but low talking from a glass-walled meeting room to my right. I ducked and peeked. Inside were 4 people sitting around a table. 2 women and 2 men, all in formals. One had a laptop open, showing what looked like a room allotment spreadsheet. Another was pointing to a document that had floor plans. It was too far for me to read, but the layout looked familiar. It was our hostel. They were discussing changes to room allocations, renovations, project deadlines, and something about maintaining perception parity with the student population. I couldn't hear everything clearly, but I caught enough to understand that they were responsible for deciding which parts of the hostel would be upgraded and how to manage complaints from students. And they weren't supposed to be seen. That was the term one of them used, low visibility integration. Their presence in the hostel was deliberately hidden to avoid backlash. That's what made sense. The administration had created these hidden wings to house their own interns, maybe management trainees, maybe junior staff. These interns worked on campus and needed accommodation. But instead of setting up a separate facility, they used parts of our hostel and masked them during regular student tours and inspections. That's why the unmarked doors, no signage, no public announcements. If students saw others living in much better rooms, there'd be outrage. Protests, complaints. So they kept it hidden. Officially, the wings were under renovation. In reality, they were operational residential quarters for non-student staff. I stayed hidden for a while longer, taking in every detail I could. The lounge had a small bookshelf, a mini fridge, even a treadmill in one corner. Their rooms had proper desks, full-length mirrors, personal kettles. I hadn't seen a single ceiling leak or broken tap in this wing. By the time I slipped out, it was past midnight. I returned to my floor and sat on my bed, stunned. Everything suddenly felt fake. All the hostel-wide notices about resource limitations, the ration water hours, the broken fixtures, they all seemed like excuses to keep the student hostel subpar while these hidden quarters stayed pristine. It wasn't about lack of money. It was about optics. I didn't tell anyone at first. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I started keeping notes, dates, times, photos of the corridor entrances, names from the nameplates. I even sketched the wing layout from memory. The more I looked into it, the clearer it became that this was a controlled operation. The admin office knew. The hostel warden knew. Maybe even the university heads. They just needed the interns close by for work, and hiding them in renovated wings was the easiest way. Eventually, I submitted an anonymous complaint to the student council with everything I'd found. I attached photos, notes, even a rough map. I don't know what they did with it, but a few weeks later, some quiet changes happened. The double doors were replaced with keypads. The frosted glass panels were tinted darker. I was never someone who believed in strange things. I liked knowing how things worked. If something felt odd, I'd find a reason. That's how I've always been. But during my 3rd year in college, I started noticing something I couldn't explain, and it scared me more than anything ever had. It started slowly, almost too small to notice. The first time, I thought I had just overslept. I had an early morning class at 8 a.m., and I was always on time. But that day, I woke up and saw the time was 11:23 a.m. My phone was still in my hand from the night before. My alarm app was open like it had been running all night. I didn't remember turning it off. I didn't remember anything after checking the clock at 11:50 p.m. I brushed it off. Maybe I had turned it off in my sleep. It had happened before, but not often. I got ready, rushed out, and attended the next class like nothing happened. But it kept happening. Not every night. Maybe twice a week at first. I'd lie down with my phone, scrolling or listening to music, and I'd plan to sleep around midnight. I'd look at the time, see it was a little before 12, and then it would be morning. Not just morning, late morning. Always after 10. Always after my early classes. It started feeling like I was skipping time. Like I was losing chunks of my life. Some nights I stayed up just to see what happened. I'd sit on my bed with the lights on, watching a video or reading something. I'd be wide awake. Then suddenly, I'd be groggy, my phone would be on the floor, and the sun would be shining through the window. Once, I woke up with a pen still in my hand and a blank notebook open on my lap. I didn't remember even starting to write. I asked a few people casually if they ever overslept in this class. Everyone said yes, of course. That's normal in college. But what I was feeling wasn't just sleep. It felt like something else. I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't tired. It wasn't the same feeling as falling asleep. It was more like switching off, like my body had gone dead for a while. The feeling started to scare me. I stopped going out much. I tried to track what I ate, when I ate, how much water I drank. I thought maybe I was dehydrated. Maybe it was something medical. I even looked up sleep disorders, but most of them didn't match. I didn't feel restless. I didn't move around at night. I didn't wake up in the middle of the night confused. It was just missing time. My hostel room didn't help. It was a single room with a small window that faced the wall of the next building. It never got real sunlight. The ceiling fan was slow even at full speed. There was a small vent near the ceiling, but I never paid much attention to it. There was a light strip on the ceiling and a switch near my bed. The room felt stale sometimes, but it was better than sharing a double room. Things got worse. It wasn't just missing morning classes. I started forgetting things I was sure I did. I'd write notes in my planner to remind myself to submit an assignment. And when I'd wake up, the note would be crossed off, but I wouldn't remember submitting it. Sometimes I did. Sometimes I didn't. I stopped trusting myself. I thought maybe it was going insane. I didn't talk to anyone about it. Not seriously, at least. I didn't want to be the crazy one in the hostel. Then I noticed something strange, something small but important. Every time I blacked out, the fan in the room was off when I woke up. That shouldn't have been possible. The power in our rooms was stable, and there were no power cuts in the building. Even if there had been, the fan should have restarted once the power came back. At first, I thought maybe I had turned it off in my sleep. But that didn't explain how it happened on nights when I hadn't even gone to sleep. Nights when I'd be sitting up, watching something, and the next thing I knew, it was morning and the fan was still off. That's when I started looking at the switchboard. There were two small indicator lights, one for the fan and one for the main lights. I watched them closely for a few nights. Nothing happened. Then, one night, around 12:03 a.m., both lights blinked off for half a second and came back on. I felt something strange in my chest, like the air had turned heavy. I reached for my phone, and the screen stayed black for a second before lighting up. I didn't think much of it at the time, just a glitch, but I wrote down the time anyway. It happened again the next night. This time at 12:01 a.m., same blink, same heavy air. I got chills, but I wasn't cold. I stared at the vent near the ceiling. I hadn't noticed before, but there was no sound coming from it. No flow. I took a piece of tissue paper and held it up near the vent. It didn't move. I looked up the specs for our hostel online. There wasn't much. It just said all rooms had fans, lights, and a passive ventilation system. But I remembered seeing some kind of maintenance note months ago stuck near the warden's office. Something about automatic power regulation after peak hours. I hadn't thought it mattered at the time. That's when I decided to set up a camera. Nothing fancy, just my old phone placed in the corner of the room, recording while I pretended to go to sleep. I used a charger cable so it would stay on all night. I tilted it to face the fan and the switchboard. That night, I went to bed like usual, pretending not to care. I left the lights on. I scrolled my phone until 11:50 p.m., then put it down beside me. I didn't feel sleepy. I kept my eyes slightly open. I remember the time, 12:04 a.m., and then nothing. I woke up at 10:37 a.m. The fan was off. The lights were off. My phone was hot like it had been working all night. I rushed to check the old phone. The video was there. Just over 9 hours of footage. I skipped through the first half hour. I saw myself lying there. At exactly 12 o'clock and 59 seconds a.m., the lights in the room blinked and shut off. The fan slowed down. The switchboard indicators turned off. I saw my own body freeze, then twitch once. It looked like I tried to sit up, then fell back. For the next 6 minutes, I didn't move at all. My chest was barely rising. The whole room looked still, too still. Then suddenly the lights flicked back on. The fan started spinning again. But I stayed motionless until 5:33 a.m. when I rolled over in my sleep. I rewatched the part where the power cut out. I turned the sound on and listened closely. At exactly midnight, I heard a low click, a sound like a circuit being turned. The fan stopped with a small groan. Then silence. No hum, no air movement. That's when I understood. The power in the room wasn't stable. It was being cut off. Not just the lights, but the fan, the plug points, everything. And if the power was off, that meant the small vent, if it was connected to any kind of air system, was also off. I thought about it. A sealed room, no fan, no airflow. For hours. It wasn't supernatural. It was science. Lack of oxygen, buildup of carbon dioxide. It wouldn't kill me, not in that short time, but it could knock me out. Just enough to make me lose time. Just enough to make me not remember. It made sense now why I never dreamed, why I woke up feeling like I'd been hit in the head while my phone stayed in my hand. I wasn't sleeping. I was passing out. Every night after midnight, my body was being forced into unconsciousness by the air turning stale and unbreathable. I felt sick. I knew I couldn't be the only one. There had to be others. But maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they just thought they were tired. I thought about my neighbors. People who slept through classes, people who snored loudly and always looked dazed in the morning. Maybe they were being affected too. I copied the video to my laptop and backed it up. I recorded the next 2 nights again. Same thing. Power cut at midnight. Total silence. Me freezing up and going limp. I didn't know who to tell. If I went straight to the warden, they'd brush it off or say I was faking it. But I had video proof. I emailed it to the student welfare office first. I used a fake email just in case. I explained everything. I included clips from the video and timestamps. I also wrote down what I suspected, that the hostel's power-saving policy was silently shutting off ventilation at night and risking student safety. I waited 2 days. Nothing happened. No reply. No unknown cement. No change. So I printed out everything. The photos, screenshots, a short explanation, and slid copies under every door in my corridor. I left one on the warden's office desk too. That afternoon, I noticed people whispering. A few looked at me differently. One of the guys from the room opposite mine asked if I was the one who sent the papers. I just nodded. 2 days later, something did happen. A campus-wide notice was issued saying the hostel ventilation system was under review. The next night, a technician came to our floor. They said they were checking power systems. A week after that, the late-night power cuts stopped. I tested it. I stayed up with the camera again. This time, at midnight, the lights didn't flicker. The fan stayed on. The air didn't turn heavy. I didn't black out. I could finally breathe. Later, I found out through a friend in the student council that the hostel had been running on a hidden power conservation mode after 12 a.m. to cut electricity bills. They never told students because they assumed no one would notice. They thought turning off the fans and vents silently wouldn't cause any problems. The rooms were considered safe enough. They were wrong. I don't know how long it had been happening. Maybe for years. Maybe some students never noticed or just thought they were sleep deprived. But I knew what I went through. It wasn't just sleep. It was something else. Something done to us without our consent. I don't think they ever admitted it publicly. The notice just said the system was being updated. I decided to start watching the back area more closely. During the day, it was quiet. The janitors came around in the morning, and the security guard did a casual sweep every few hours, but no one really stayed back there long. It was the sort of space people ignored. A dead end full of rusted bins and tangled weeds. I'd sit on a low concrete lip near the fence, pretending to scroll my phone, but really I was just watching that bin. 3 days passed, and nothing happened. No sounds, no movement, not even a new smell. I started to feel like maybe I had overthought the whole thing. Then came Friday night. It was just after 10 p.m. I had taken my usual walk around the block and returned through the side gate near the dumpsters. As soon as I stepped into the alley behind the hostel, I smelled it. Not faintly. It was thick, clinging to the air like steam in a closed bathroom. Garlic, chili oil, some kind of meat, pork maybe. And that wasn't all. There was a low hum too, like an industrial fan running somewhere inside the walls. I crouched down in front of the vent and listened. There was sound now, definitely. The occasional clang of metal on metal. The scrape of something being dragged. The soft bubbling of hot oil. It didn't sound like a full restaurant, but it was more than one person cooking in a pan. It had rhythm, steps, work, repetition. This wasn't someone sneaking a midnight snack. This was an operation. I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed crouched for a long time, trying to see if I could spot anything deeper inside. The duct was dark and caked in old grease. Bits of paper and lint had caught on the edges, and the inner walls were coated in dust. But further in, maybe 20 feet or more, I could see a faint glow, orange and flickering. Firelight, maybe. I couldn't hear voices, but I could hear movement. Definite movement. I backed away slowly. My knees were numb from squatting. I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I report it? Tell the warden? But I didn't have proof. Just a strange smell and a decades-old blueprint. And honestly, I wasn't even sure what I was reporting. A vent? A warm duct? A smell? The next day, I went into town and bought a cheap borescope camera, the kind with a long, flexible neck you can stick into tight spaces. I had to use up almost all my monthly allowance to get it, but I didn't care. I needed to see what was inside. That night, I went back to the vent. I waited until after 11, when the hostel was asleep and the back alley was dead quiet. The smell was there again, strong and layered, like multiple things being cooked at once. I pushed the camera through the vent and slowly snaked it inward. The cord was stiff and cheap, but it moved. The screen lit up with murky shapes. Dust, rust, bits of wire. As I kept going, I started to see clearer shapes, a plastic bag, a pipe, an old fan casing. Then, suddenly, open space. The camera flicked sideways and caught a glimpse of a room. Not large, but wide enough to stand and move in. There were metal counters, a stove, and 2 large gas cylinders. There were shelves stacked with boxes, spices, and plastic containers. A red plastic stool, a folding table, and in the middle a man, his back to the camera, standing over a stove, stirring something in a wok. He wore a gray t-shirt soaked in sweat and a blue towel slung over his shoulder. His hair was cropped short and his movements were practiced fast. He didn't see the camera. I froze. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline. This was real. There was someone operating a makeshift kitchen right behind our hostel. Not inside the locked kitchen, but behind it, in the forgotten service corridor. I pulled the scope back and quietly replaced the vent screen. My mind was racing. This explained the smell. The door had that small gap, and the vent tunnel must have connected directly into the back corridor, which was still somehow active. That hidden kitchen was using the ductwork that originally connected to the hostel kitchen decades ago. It was smart in a way. They didn't need their own chimney or exhaust. They were piggybacking off the building's old systems. That explained the warm air, the grease, the perfect timing at night. But who were they? And more importantly, why was no one else noticing? The next few days, I watched more closely. I saw the same patterns. Around 9:30 p.m., the smell would begin. By 10 o'clock, it would be strong. Sometimes different dishes, always varied. One night it smelled like grilled fish. Another night, it was heavy with cumin and cardamom. Always precise, always short-lived. By midnight, the smells would fade again. I began waking up earlier, checking the alley in the morning. That's when I started seeing the deliveries. A small black scooter, scratched and dented, would pull up to the side fence around 6 a.m. The rider wore a large black hoodie, even in the heat, and kept their head down. They'd unload plastic crates, some with vegetables, others with sealed packets. Sometimes there were gas cylinders, always small batches, enough to feed maybe a dozen people, but no more. They pushed them through the same fence gap I had used, stacking them behind the vent area, then ride off without a word. Someone would collect the supplies later. I never saw who, just that by 8 a.m., the crates would be gone. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I began researching online. Illegal food operations, underground stalls, fire hazards. Most of the articles were about basement setups or apartments being used as makeshift restaurants. But none were this well hidden, and none were inside a university hostel. A part of me wanted to just report it, go to the authorities. But the other part, the larger part, was curious. I needed to understand how deep this went. So one evening, I followed the smell. Literally, around 9:40 p.m., when the smell began, I walked through the hallway slowly, stopping at every vent, every pipe opening. I noted which ones were warm, which ones smelled stronger. Eventually, I found a small grate near the baseboard in the laundry room that had a sharper scent. It had been painted over, but it was still open. When I leaned close, I could hear the faint sizzle of oil. I checked the blueprint again. That duct connected to the lower kitchen wall, which meant that, years ago, hot air from the old kitchen would have vented through there. If the back corridor was using the same exhaust system, that would explain everything. But what I found next changed everything. I decided to break in, not into the kitchen, that was still locked tight. But into the back corridor, I figured there had to be another access point. Something hidden, something not meant to be used. I spent 4 nights scouring the campus perimeter. Then, finally, I found it, a rusted door behind the old sports equipment shed, half covered in vines. It was metal, with faded paint and no signage. The handle was jammed, but the lock was long gone. I pushed it slowly, and it creaked open with effort. Inside was a narrow tunnel, concrete walls, exposed wiring, and broken light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. The air was thick with dust, but it was warm and scented. That same unmistakable smell. I followed the tunnel carefully. It curved left, then right, and descended slightly. The walls grew darker. The floor became sticky. I heard it before I saw it. The hiss of gas, the scrape of metal, then light. I crouched behind a stack of discarded chairs and peeked into the room. It was the same setup I'd seen through the camera. Only now it was alive. 2 men were working inside. One at the stove, another chopping something on the table. The place was tight. Barely enough space for them to move without bumping shoulders. Steam curled up toward a makeshift vent fan mounted into the ceiling. The sound of sizzling oil filled the space. Containers lined the wall. Plastic stools were stacked in the corner. Then I saw it, the delivery hatch. Just a wooden slot built into the wall, probably once connected to the main kitchen. A narrow gap near the top let the steam escape, straight into the hostel's old ductwork. It all made sense. The smell wasn't from ghosts or hidden activity inside the kitchen. It was from this illegal food stall, running every night, hidden from view, sending its aroma through the crumbling old air system into our building. And the locked kitchen, it wasn't completely sealed. That half-inch gap was enough for the smell to escape into the hallway. I backed away quietly and exited the way I came. I didn't report them, not immediately. I sat with the knowledge for a few days, watching, thinking. They weren't hurting anyone, not directly. They weren't poisoning people or running drugs. They were just cooking food in a forgotten corridor using old infrastructure. But it wasn't safe. There were gas lines, open flames, no ventilation. One accident, and the whole back of the hostel could catch fire. So I wrote an anonymous letter. I typed it up, printed it at the library, and slid it under the door of the warden's office late one night. I included everything: the vent, the blueprint, the deliveries, the fire hazard. I didn't include my name. 2 days later, the smell stopped. They came in the middle of the night with workers, cut open the back wall, sealed the vent, and changed the padlock on the kitchen. The service corridor was sealed off with a welded gate. A notice went up in the hostel lobby the next morning. Unauthorized usage of campus property discovered. Matter resolved. No, I moved into Block C of the university's South Campus housing at the start of my second year. The building was one of the older ones, but had been refurbished partially. They kept the original concrete shell, but had updated the interiors, the wiring, and the elevator systems. The university boasted about its green renovations and safety checks, though no one really paid attention to those emails. It was an 8th-floor building, and I was assigned to the 6th floor. I remembered riding the elevator the day I moved in. I was tired, hauling 2 suitcases and a backpack. The elevator was slow, but smooth. I pressed 6. It took me there, and I walked out into the quiet hallway. There were those faint fluorescent lights above, a humming sound from the vents, and a musty smell of recently dried paint and old concrete beneath it. It felt like a place that had been scrubbed down, but not renewed completely. I settled in quickly, unpacked, and by the end of the week, I was used to the creaky floorboards, humming pipes, and dim stairwells. The first time I noticed something off was about 2 weeks in a term. I was returning from the library late one night, maybe around 11:30 p.m. The elevator stopped at my floor, or at least I thought it did. I remember stepping out and thinking the corridor looked unfamiliar. The lighting felt slightly darker, and there was no familiar flicker from the tube above room 613 that usually annoyed me. I looked around and noticed none of the doors had numbers on them. It wasn't until I walked a few steps that I realized something was wrong. The layout was the same as my floor, but everything looked too empty. The fire extinguisher cabinet was gone, the bulletin board near the stairwell was missing, and the door to the common room was bolted shut with a metal bar. It wasn't locked, it was sealed. I stood still for a moment, trying to figure it out. Maybe I had pressed the wrong button. I turned back toward the elevator, but it had already closed. I pressed the call button and waited. The display said the elevator was on the second floor. I waited another 30 seconds, and the elevator doors opened again. I got in, pressed 6, and this time when the doors opened, it was the hallway I knew. The flickering tube light was there. The fire extinguisher, the posters about club meetings and intramurals, everything in place. I chalked it up to being tired, but it wasn't a one-time thing. Over the next week, I heard 2 students on my floor talking in the hallway. They weren't loud, but I could hear through the thin door. One of them said, "I got out on the wrong floor." Same hallway, but empty. Everything was locked. The other responded with something like, "Dude, same." That place creeped me out. No one else seemed to be talking about it publicly. There were no campus emails, no signs in the elevator. Just random incidents, whispers in the hall. That made me curious. I started asking around casually. Most people hadn't experienced it, but a few had. All said the same thing. Elevator stops, you step out thinking it's your floor, but it's wrong. Same layout, different feeling. Doors with no numbers. Dim lights. Silence. I started paying closer attention. I tried testing it. Every day for a week, I rode the elevator from the ground floor to the 6th and back. I always looked at the display, always made sure I pressed the right button. Sometimes it took me to the right place, but twice I ended up on that same floor again. The one that looked like mine but wasn't. One of those times, I noticed something new. The door to room 615 was slightly ajar. I didn't open it. I wasn't brave enough. But I stood there, staring at it, feeling that strange, dry air coming from inside. The hallway smelled different too. Less like people, more like drywall and burnt metal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about it. Why would a floor look like mine, but be completely empty? Why were the doors bolted shut? Why would the university leave it like that? I started doing some research. I searched the university archives, local news, student forums. There was nothing in the recent news, nothing on the official site. But on an old university message board, archived from about 3 years ago, I found a thread titled "Weird Stuff in Block C." Most of the thread was junk, complaints about hot water and thin walls. But buried halfway down, one anonymous post said, "My cousin used to stay on 6th. After the fire last year, they shut the 5th floor for renovation. I think they sealed it off, but elevators still stop there sometimes." That post was from 2 years before I moved in. It didn't give many details, but it confirmed what I suspected. That empty hallway wasn't a glitch or my imagination. It was the 5th floor sealed off after a fire. But the elevator system still recognized it. I knew what I had to do. I needed to find out more. I wanted to go there deliberately, see if there were signs of fire damage, figure out why it was sealed. It felt reckless, but I couldn't let it go. I brought a flashlight, just in case, and a portable charger. I told myself I'd stay only a few minutes. The next evening, after dinner, I got into the elevator and pressed 5. The button didn't light up. It was dead. I tried again. Nothing. So I pressed 6, but as the elevator moved up, I watched the floor indicator. G1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It stopped. The doors opened. I stepped out. Same hallway. No numbers. Dim lighting. Sealed doors. This time I was ready. I walked quietly, slowly, shining my flashlight on the ceiling, the walls. I noticed soot marks along the base of the hallway walls. Subtle, but there. A few tiles on the ceiling were cracked. The air vents were blocked with black plastic sheets. I walked past what would have been room 514. The handle was missing. Some doors had rusted bolts across them. There were scrape marks on the floor near one of them, like someone had tried forcing it open. I checked the time. I had been there about 4 minutes. I started to turn back, but then I noticed something to the left near the stairwell. A red box with a faded label, fire panel. It was rusted shut. I walked over to it and crouched down. There were 2 small keyholes and a sticker, "Do not tamper. Maintenance only." I stood up and turned around. The elevator doors were closed. I pressed the button. Nothing. The floor indicator above the doors was off. I pressed it again. Waited. Nothing. I started to panic. I walked to the stairwell and tried the door. It was locked. I knocked on it hard, tried forcing it, but it wouldn't move. That's when I realized I was stuck. The air felt heavier now. My flashlight flickered once, then steadied. I checked my phone. No signal. I couldn't even tell if Wi-Fi was reaching down here. I paced the hallway, trying to stay calm. I figured someone would call the elevator soon, and would come back. So I waited. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then over half an hour. Still nothing. I sat down on the floor. My palms were sweating. Every small creak in the pipes made me jump. I checked the ceiling, wondering if there were cameras, any way someone could see I was down there. Then, finally, after nearly 40 minutes, the elevator doors opened on their own. I didn't wait. I got up, ran inside, pressed 6, and leaned against the back wall. The elevator moved. The floor indicator lit up again. It passed 5, and I reached my floor. I walked straight to my room, locked the door, and sat on my bed. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know what to say. Hey, I got stuck on a sealed floor because the elevator still stops there. It sounded insane, but I kept researching. Eventually, I found a faculty member in the archives department who had uploaded old facility reports. Hidden deep in a PDF appendix, there was incident. Electrical fire, block C, level 5. Origin, overloaded panel in storage room. Action taken, residents relocated. Floor sealed pending full repair. Estimated reactivation, TBD. The report was dated 4 years ago. No update after that. So the university sealed it off but never fixed it. They didn't remove the elevator's programming. And now, people occasionally end up there, not realizing it. I started watching more closely. I noticed the elevator sometimes paused between 4 and 6, even when no one pressed 5. I think it happened more often late at night. Maybe fewer calls made the system default to older routines. Or maybe there was some sensor bug. I began keeping track of which days it happened. There was a pattern: low elevator use, late hours, certain car sign. Elevator B, specifically. I even managed to talk to maintenance staff under the pretense of a research paper. One of them let it slip that B's software hasn't been updated in a while. He joked about it, not knowing. I wrote a letter to campus facilities. I explained the misconfigured software. I didn't mention I had been trapped. I just said people were getting off on an inactive floor and it posed a safety risk. 3 weeks later, signs appeared in both elevators. Level 5 inactive. Do not exit on level 5. Floor sealed pending renovations. They also added key-lock access to that button. Now, only maintenance staff can select it. And just like that, the strange hallway was acknowledged. Quietly. No campus-wide announcement. No emails. Just a sign. But sometimes I wonder, how many people ended up there and couldn't get back? How many knocked on the stairwell door and no one heard them? How many phones had no signal, flashlights failed, and minutes stretched into hours? Now, every time I ride that elevator and it